She said yes to a lie that could destroy her, but saying no would have killed her family first. Tonight, you're about to witness the most dangerous gamble a woman ever made in high society. A fake engagement that turned into a scandal, a war of wits, and a love nobody saw coming. This is the story of Elara Whitcomb, the noblewoman who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Stay until the end to see how it all unravels. And if you're hooked, smash that like button and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Let's get into it. The chandelier above Elara's head cost more than her family's estate would fetch at auction. She knew this because she'd spent the last 20 minutes calculating it, bead by crystal bead, while pretending to sip champagne she couldn't afford to replace if she spilled it on her borrowed dress. The Ashford ballroom glittered like a jewelry box designed by someone who'd never worried about the price of candles. Elara stood near a marble pillar, positioned precisely where she could observe without being observed, a skill she'd perfected over 3 years of declining from minor gentry into genteel poverty. "You're doing it again." Elara didn't flinch. Her cousin Vivian had appeared at her elbow, pink-cheeked from dancing, smelling of rosewater, and the particular confidence that came from having a father who still paid his debts. "Doing what?" Elara asked. "That thing where you count everything. I can see your eyes moving." Vivian adjusted her gloves, pale blue silk that matched her gown perfectly. Everything about Vivian matched perfectly. "It's unsettling, makes you look calculating." "I am calculating." "Well, don't look it. You're supposed to be enjoying yourself." Elara took the smallest possible sip of champagne, letting one bubble rest on her tongue before swallowing. Enjoying herself, as if she'd come here for pleasure rather than obligation. As if the 17 pounds her mother had spent on new gloves for her wasn't currently the difference between keeping their last housemaid and doing their own washing. "I'll work on my expression," Elara said. Vivian squeezed her arm, meant to be affectionate but somehow landing closer to pity. "I know things are difficult right now, but you can't let it show. People talk." People already talked. Elara had heard the whispers at the last 3 gatherings, how the Whitcomb fortune had evaporated, how her father had died leaving nothing but debts and a crumbling manor house in Derbyshire, how her mother had taken to her bed with nerves and left Elara to manage creditors at 23 years old. The orchestra swung into a waltz. Vivian's eyes tracked toward a young lieutenant across the room. "Go," Elara said. "I'm fine here." "You're sure? Because Lady Pemberton keeps looking at you, and I don't think it's because she admires your dress." Elara glanced toward the cluster of matrons holding court near the refreshment table. Lady Pemberton, formidable in purple silk and 3 strands of pearls, was indeed staring at her with an expression somewhere between assessment and ambush. "I'll manage," Elara said, though her pulse picked up its pace. Vivian drifted away into the waltz, and Elara considered her options. She could retreat to the ladies' retiring room. She could develop a sudden headache. She could— "Miss Whitcomb." Too late. Lady Pemberton bore down on her like a ship of the line engaging a rowboat. She was 60-something, steel-spined, with eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for managing everyone's business with the efficiency of a military campaign. "Lady Pemberton." Elara executed a curtsy that was correct to the millimeter. "How lovely to see you." "Is it?" Lady Pemberton's smile was sharp. "You've been avoiding me for the past hour." "I wasn't aware you wished to speak with me." "Don't be coy. It doesn't suit you." Lady Pemberton gestured toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. They moved through the crowd, Lady Pemberton cutting through clusters of conversation like Moses through the Red Sea. People parted, nodded, smiled nervously. Elara kept her expression neutral and her spine straight, aware of eyes following them. They stopped near a bank of windows overlooking the garden. Outside, lanterns glowed among the rose bushes, and couples strolled paths lined with white stones that probably cost more than— "Stop counting," Elara told herself. "I'll be direct," Lady Pemberton said. "I need something from you, and in exchange I can offer you something you desperately need." Elara's stomach clenched. "I'm afraid I don't." "Your family is 3 months from complete ruin. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." The words hit like a slap, made worse by being absolutely true. Elara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she held Lady Pemberton's gaze. "My family's circumstances are our own concern," she said quietly. They are, until I make them mine. Lady Pemberton opened her fan with a snap, using it to shield their conversation from the room. I have a son. The Duke of Thornvale. Everyone knew about the Duke of Thornvale. Brilliant, cold, powerful, and pathologically private. He attended Parliament, managed a vast estate, and avoided society with the dedication other men applied to pursuing it. Yes, Alistair. Something flickered in Lady Pemberton's eyes. Frustration, maybe, or worry buried under control. He's 31 years old and has refused every match I've proposed. The rumors are becoming problematic. Elara waited. She had no idea where this was leading, but the knot in her stomach tightened. I need those rumors stopped, Lady Pemberton continued. I need society to believe he's settled, spoken for, about to make an appropriate match. Understanding arrived like cold water. You want me to pretend to be engaged to your son. I want you to be his fiancée for the season. 3 months. You'll attend events together, be seen together, convince everyone the match is real. Lady Pemberton's fan stilled. In exchange, I will personally settle your father's debts and provide your mother with an income of £800 per annum for life. Elara's mind went blank, then kicked into rapid calculation. £800. Their debts cleared. Her mother secure. It was impossible. It was salvation. It was insane. He'll never agree to this, Elara said. He already has, reluctantly, but he sees the necessity. Why me? Lady Pemberton's smile returned, thin and satisfied. Because you're clever enough to carry it off, desperate enough to agree, and unknown enough that when it ends, as it must, society will believe he simply came to his senses. No one will blame a duke for breaking an engagement with a girl whose family lost everything. The cruelty of it was elegant. Elara would be compensated for 3 months of performance and a lifetime of being the woman the Duke of Thornvale had rejected. Her reputation would survive, barely, and her family would be saved. I need to think about this, Elara said. You have until midnight. After that, I'll make other arrangements, and you'll go back to counting chandeliers while your creditors count days until they seize your mother's house. Lady Pemberton swept away, leaving Elara alone by the window with her heart hammering and her thoughts racing. 3 months. A lie. A duke she'd never met. Financial ruin or moral compromise. She looked out at the garden, at the expensive lanterns and the manicured roses and the couples strolling in blissful ignorance of what it meant to choose between pride and survival. Then she looked back at the ballroom, at the glittering crowd, at Vivian dancing in her perfect blue dress, at the champagne and the chandeliers and everything that represented a world Elara was already halfway out of. The clock on the mantel showed 11:15. Elara found her mother's cousin, Mrs. Hartford, near the card room and made her excuses. A headache, needed air, would send for the carriage. Mrs. Hartford barely looked up from her whist hand, just waved her away with practiced disinterest. Outside, the night air bit through Elara's thin shawl. She walked to the far end of the terrace, away from the French doors spilling music and light, and forced herself to think. £800 per annum. She did the mathematics automatically. Her mother could live comfortably. Modestly, but comfortably. The debts cleared meant no more creditors appearing at odd hours, no more threatening letters, no more nights lying awake calculating which bills to pay and which to defer. 3 months of pretending, of lying, of standing beside a man she didn't know and convincing society they were in love. What would her father have said? But her father was dead, and his gambling debts and poor investments were very much alive, and thinking about what he would have wanted was a luxury she couldn't afford. You look like you're deciding whether to jump. Elara spun around. A man stood in the shadows near the terrace railing, tall, dark-haired, dressed in evening clothes that fit like they'd been made specifically for his frame, which they probably had been. He moved forward into the lantern light, and Elara's breath caught. She knew this face. Everyone knew this face, though it was rarely seen in ballrooms. Alistair Thornvale, the Duke himself. I wasn't planning to jump, Elara said, recovering. The fall wouldn't be sufficient. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Dark humor. Unexpected. From someone like me. From someone in general. Most people at these things laugh at nothing and mean it. He leaned against the railing, studying her with eyes that were either gray or blue. The light made it hard to tell. His face was angular, sharp-featured, with the kind of bone structure that would look severe in old age. He was handsome the way a winter landscape was handsome, cold, stark, beautiful from a distance. "You're Miss Whitcomb," he said. It wasn't a question. "You know who I am. My mother's conversations aren't as private as she believes." He pulled out a cigarette case, offered it to her. When she shook her head, he lit one for himself, the match flaring orange in the dark. "She cornered you an hour ago, delivered her proposal, left you to twist in the wind until midnight. Does that bother you? Her methods? No, they're effective." He exhaled smoke toward the garden. "The fact that she's doing this at all? Somewhat." Elara studied him. There was no warmth in his voice, but no particular coldness either. He spoke like someone reading from a ledger, factual, detached, vaguely bored. "Why did you agree to it?" she asked. "Because refusing would require explaining why I refuse every match she proposes, and that explanation would create worse problems than a fake engagement." "So you're using me." "We're using each other. That's the arrangement." He tapped ash over the railing. "You need money. I need society to stop speculating about why I avoid marriage. 3 months of pretending solves both problems." "And then?" "Then we have a quiet mutual parting. I'm devastated. You're gracious. We both move on with our lives. You'll be compensated. I'll be left alone. Everyone wins." He made it sound so simple, so transactional, like they were negotiating a business contract rather than orchestrating a public deception. "What if I say no?" Elara asked. "Then you say no. I'll find another solution, you'll find another way to save your family, and we'll both forget this conversation happened." But they both knew she didn't have another way. Lady Pemberton had made sure of that. Elara looked at him, really looked. He was watching her with the same assessment she'd used on the chandelier earlier, calculating, measuring, deciding if she was worth the investment. "You don't like people much, do you?" she said. That almost smile returned. "I like people fine. I don't like pretending to be something I'm not for their entertainment. And yet here we are, planning to pretend for 3 months straight. Ironic, isn't it?" The clock inside began to chime. Midnight, Elara's deadline. Alistair dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his heel. "My mother will be waiting for your answer." "What's it going to be, Miss Whitcomb?" Elara thought about her mother's house, about the creditors, about Vivian's pity and Mrs. Hartford's disinterest and the weight of being poor in a world designed for the rich. She thought about pride and survival and the difference between the two. 3 months, she said. A perfect illusion, and when it ends, we both walk away clean. Agreed. He held out his hand. Elara hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, cool, and lasted exactly as long as a business handshake should. "Welcome to the arrangement, Miss Whitcomb," he said. "Try not to fall in love with me. It would complicate things." "You should be so lucky, Your Grace." This time, he actually smiled. Lady Pemberton received Elara's answer with the satisfaction of a general whose battle plan had proceeded exactly as predicted. "Excellent. You'll move to Thornvale House on Monday. We'll announce the engagement at the Cavendish Ball next Friday." She produced a document from her reticule. "Sign this. It outlines the terms, the compensation, and the confidentiality requirements." Elara scanned the contract. It was thorough, precise, and more generous than Lady Pemberton had initially indicated. A signing bonus of £100, in addition to the debt settlement and her mother's income. "This says I'll receive a wardrobe allowance. You can't be seen in borrowed dresses. It would raise questions." Lady Pemberton handed her a pen. "Everything must be perfect. The illusion only works if no one suspects it's an illusion." Elara signed. Her handwriting looked strange on the expensive paper. Too simple, too honest for the lie it was authorizing. "One more thing," Lady Pemberton said. "Alistair will expect you to be convincing. He won't tolerate a performance that's obviously false. Can you manage that?" Elara thought about the years she'd spent pretending their finances were fine, pretending her father's death hadn't destroyed them, pretending she belonged in ballrooms where the champagne cost more than her shoes. "I've been pretending my whole life," she said. "I'm very good at it." Lady Pemberton's smile was approving and somehow predatory at once. "Then we'll get along perfectly." Elara told her mother on Sunday morning in the sitting room that still had good furniture but increasingly shabby curtains. Engaged? Her mother set down her teacup with a hand that shook slightly. To the Duke of Thornvale? But you've never even… How did this happen? We've been corresponding, Elara lied smoothly. Quietly. He doesn't enjoy society, so we've been discreet. It was a better story than the truth. Her mother, fragile since her father's death, didn't need to know about contracts and calculated deceptions. Oh, Elara! Tears gathered in her mother's eyes. Your father would have been so proud. A duke, and such a respected family. Guilt twisted in Elara's stomach, but she pushed it down. This was survival. This was saving her mother from ruin. The wedding won't be for some time, Elara continued, but Lady Pemberton has been very generous. She's settling father's debts and establishing an income for you. Her mother's face crumpled with relief so profound it was painful to watch. All of them? All of them. Her mother wept then, quietly, into a handkerchief that had been mended 3 times. Elara held her, stroking her hair, and told herself this was the right choice, the only choice. Later, alone in her room, Elara packed her things, not many, since she didn't own many, 2 decent dresses, her mother's pearls, a few books, writing supplies. The wardrobe allowance would fill in the rest. She looked at herself in the mirror, same face, same dark hair, same gray eyes that her father had called serious. Nothing about her appearance had changed, but something fundamental had shifted. Tomorrow, she would move to Thornvale House. She would become Elara Whitcomb, fiancée of the Duke, darling of society, living a lie so complete that even she would have to believe it sometimes. The woman in the mirror looked back at her, and Elara wondered if she would recognize herself in 3 months. Thornvale House sat in Mayfair like a fortress disguised as a residence. 4 stories of pale stone, black iron railings, windows that reflected the street, back at itself, without revealing what lay inside. Elara arrived Monday afternoon in a carriage Lady Pemberton had sent. Black, elegant, drawn by matched greys that probably ate better than most of London's poor. The driver handed her down without expression, and a butler appeared at the door as if he'd been waiting for precisely this moment. Miss Whitcomb, welcome to Thornvale House. I'm Graves. He was 60, silver-haired, with the kind of dignified bearing that suggested he'd been butlering since birth and considered it a sacred calling. Thank you, Graves. Inside, the house was exactly what Elara had expected. Expensive, tasteful, and utterly impersonal. The entrance hall featured marble floors, a sweeping staircase, and artwork that was probably worth more than her family's entire estate. Everything was spotless, perfectly arranged, and completely devoid of personality. His Grace is in the library, Graves said. He asked that you join him once you'd arrived. Elara followed him through corridors lined with portraits of previous Thornvales, all of whom shared Alistair's severe bone structure and cool gaze. They looked like a family that had been practicing disapproval for generations. The library was 2 stories tall, wrapped in books from floor to ceiling, with rolling ladders and leather furniture and windows that looked out over a private garden. Alistair stood near one of those windows, reading what looked like a parliamentary report. He glanced up when she entered. You're here. As agreed. He set down the report, studied her for a moment, then gestured to a chair. Sit. We should establish some ground rules. Elara sat. The chair was leather, butter soft, and tried to swallow her whole. She perched on the edge instead, keeping her spine straight. Alistair remained standing, which gave him a tactical advantage. He probably knew it. First, he said, we maintain separate quarters. You'll have the east wing, I'll keep the west. We'll share public spaces when necessary, but otherwise we stay out of each other's way. Agreed. Second, in public we're convincing, affectionate, engaged. In private, we're honest. No need to perform when it's just us. That seems reasonable? Third, no one outside this house knows the truth. Not your family, not your friends, no one. The illusion only works if it's complete. Elara nodded. She'd already lied to her mother. Lying to everyone else would just be more of the same. Fourth, Alistair continued, if at any point you want out, you tell me. We'll end it quietly. You'll still get the compensation. I'm not interested in keeping anyone prisoner to an arrangement they hate. Why would I hate it? I'm getting paid to attend parties and wear nice dresses. You're getting paid to lie constantly, live with a stranger, and convince an entire social class that you're in love with someone you barely know. His expression didn't change. Some people find that exhausting. I'll manage. Will you? He moved closer, studying her with that same assessing look from the terrace. Because once we announce this, there's no taking it back. Society will watch everything you do. They'll analyze every word, every glance, every gesture. One wrong move and they'll tear you apart. Then I won't make a wrong move. That confident? That desperate? Something flickered in his eyes, recognition maybe, or respect. He nodded slowly. Honesty. Good. We'll work better if we're honest with each other at least. A maid appeared in the doorway. Your Grace, Miss Whitcomb's rooms are ready. Thank you, Peters. Alistair looked back at Elara. Get settled. Dinner's at 8. We'll start practicing then. Practicing? Being engaged, looking like we tolerate each other. All the little performances that will make Friday's announcement believable. He picked up his parliamentary report again, already dismissing her. You said you were good at pretending. Let's find out if that's true. Elara's quarters were ridiculous. A bedroom the size of her mother's entire sitting room, with a 4-poster bed that could sleep 4, a writing desk near bay windows, and a wardrobe that was currently empty but wouldn't be for long. Lady Pemberton had promised the dressmaker would arrive tomorrow. There was an adjoining sitting room, a private bathroom with actual hot running water, and enough space that Elara could pace for 5 minutes without covering the same ground twice. She unpacked her meager belongings, which looked pathetic scattered across the expensive furniture. 2 dresses in a wardrobe built for 20. 1 pair of decent shoes. Her mother's pearls, which were real but small. Peters, the maid, appeared at 7:30 to help her dress for dinner. Just the blue one, Elara said. It's the best I have. Peters didn't comment, but her expression suggested she'd seen the dress and found it wanting. She worked efficiently, doing Elara's hair in a simple style that at least looked intentional rather than neglected. You'll do fine, miss, Peters said, adjusting a hairpin. His Grace isn't as difficult as people think, just particular. About what? Everything. Peters smiled slightly. But he's fair. Doesn't tolerate gossip, pays well, never raises his voice. Could be worse. Elara studied her reflection. The blue dress was 3 years old, slightly faded, and had been let out once already. But with her hair done properly and the pearls at her throat, she looked almost appropriate. Almost. Thank you, Peters. Dinner's in the small dining room, down the hall, 3rd door on the left. The small dining room seated 12 and featured a table that could have doubled as a ballroom floor. Alistair sat at one end, still reading, a different report this time, something about trade policy. He glanced up when she entered, and his gaze traveled from her face to her dress to her shoes and back again. His expression didn't change, but she felt assessed anyway. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair on his right. Not at the far end of the table, which would have been formal and distant. Close enough for conversation. The arrangement felt deliberate. A footman appeared with soup, then another course, then another. Elara ate carefully, aware of being watched, aware of every movement of her fork and knife. Relax, Alistair said. You're not auditioning. Aren't I? The audition was when you agreed to this. Now we're past that part. He set down his fork. Tell me about yourself. What do you want to know? Anything, everything. If we're going to convince people we're engaged, I should probably know more than your name and your debt situation. Fair point. Elara considered what to say, what to reveal, what to keep hidden. I'm 23, she began. I grew up in Derbyshire, at Whitcomb Manor. My father died 2 years ago. My mother is delicate. I don't have siblings. I like mathematics and hate embroidery. I read constantly, which people find odd. I'm good at chess and terrible at dancing. What do you read? History, philosophy, novels sometimes, but I prefer nonfiction, things I can learn from. Favorite philosopher? Mill. You? Hume. He leaned back in his chair. Though I find most philosophy more interesting as intellectual exercise than practical guidance. Skeptical of abstract principles? skeptical of anything that doesn't account for reality. They talked through the rest of dinner about books, about politics, about the absurdity of society's rules, and the economic policies Alistair was fighting in Parliament. He was sharp, direct, and had opinions on everything. Elara found herself arguing with him about tariffs, about social reform, about whether humans were fundamentally rational or fundamentally selfish. It was the first interesting conversation she'd had in months. When dinner ended, Alistair stood. "Tomorrow, the dressmaker arrives at 10. Mother will be here at 2 to begin coaching you on society expectations. Friday, we make the announcement. Between now and then, we practice being comfortable with each other." How do we do that? Spend time together, talk, get used to proximity. He moved toward the door, then paused. "You held your own tonight, in conversation. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might be intimidated. Most people are. I'm not most people." "No," he agreed. "You're not. That might actually make this bearable." It wasn't quite a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. Elara decided to take it as progress. The week passed in a blur of preparation. The dressmaker, Madame Laurent, arrived with assistants and enough fabric to clothe a small army. She measured, pinned, and produced sketches that transformed Elara from poor relation to Duchess-in-waiting. "You have good bone structure," Madame Laurent announced, circling Elara like a general surveying terrain. "We work with that. Strong colors, clean lines, no pastels, they'll wash you out." By Wednesday, the first dresses arrived. Deep emerald, midnight blue, rich burgundy, fabrics that felt like sin and fit like they'd been painted on. Elara barely recognized herself in the mirror. Lady Pemberton's coaching was less pleasant. "You walk like you're apologizing for existing," she said on Tuesday. "Stop slouching, shoulders back. You're about to be a duchess, not a scullery maid." "I'm not about to be anything. This is temporary. While it lasts, you'll act the part." Lady Pemberton circled her the same way Madame Laurent had, but with considerably less approval. "How do you address a baroness? How do you refuse an invitation without giving offense? What do you say when someone asks about the wedding date?" Elara absorbed it all, the rules, the strategies, the careful dance of saying nothing while appearing to say everything. It was like learning a new language, one built entirely of implication and subtext. She and Alistair fell into a routine. Breakfast together in the morning room where they read newspapers and occasionally traded observations. Dinner in the evening where they continued their arguments about philosophy and politics. In between, they orbited each other through the house, passing in hallways, occupying opposite ends of the library, maintaining the separate but present dynamic he'd proposed. "You're not afraid of disagreeing with me," Alistair observed on Thursday night over wine in the library. "Should I be? Most people are. They think disagreement means disrespect." "That's stupid. How do you learn anything if everyone just agrees with you?" He smiled at that. A real smile, not the almost smile. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less severe. "Exactly," he said. Friday morning arrived with gray skies and the particular kind of tension that came from knowing the performance was about to begin. Elara dressed in the emerald gown Madame Laurent had proclaimed her triumph. It fit perfectly, made her skin look luminous, and probably cost more than her family had spent on clothing in 5 years. Peters did her hair in an elaborate style that involved pins, curls, and what felt like minor engineering. "You look beautiful, miss," Peters said. Elara looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger, polished, elegant, expensive, someone who belonged at a duke's side. The lie, she realized, was already starting to feel real. Lady Pemberton arrived at noon for final instructions. "The announcement will be made during the first dance. Alistair will request your hand, you'll accept, and Lord Cavendish will make the formal announcement before the supper break." She adjusted Elara's necklace, diamonds, borrowed from the Pemberton collection. "Smile, but not too much. Look happy, but not giddy. You're dignified, in love, and slightly overwhelmed by the attention. Can you manage that?" "Yes." "Any questions?" "What if someone doesn't believe us?" "They will, because we've made it believable." Lady Pemberton's smile was satisfied. "And because people see what they expect to see. A duke needs a duchess. You need security. It's a perfectly logical match." The carriage arrived at 7. Alistair waited in the entrance hall, dressed in formal evening wear that made him look even more severe and aristocratic than usual. He looked at her. Really looked for a long moment. "You look—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "Appropriate? Good. Ready. Thank you?" It was meant as a compliment. "Then you should work on your delivery." That almost smile appeared. He offered his arm. "Shall we go lie to everyone we know?" Elara took his arm, felt the solid muscle beneath expensive fabric, and tried to ignore the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "Let's make it convincing," she said. The carriage carried them toward the Cavendish ball, toward the lie that would change everything, toward a performance that had to be perfect. Elara looked out the window at London's glittering streets and wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life, or the worst. In 3 months, she'd find out. The Cavendish ballroom was 3 times the size of Ashford's and twice as loud. Crystal, silk, and diamonds everywhere Elara looked. A museum of wealth pretending to be a party. She felt Alistair's arm tense slightly beneath her gloved hand as they entered, and realized he hated this as much as she did, just for different reasons. "Smile," he murmured. "You look like you're walking to your execution." "Aren't I?" "Only socially." His mouth curved, barely. "The actual dying comes later." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Several heads turned. Alistair guided her forward into the crowd, and the whispers started immediately. She could feel them like insects crawling up her spine. "Who is that with Thornvale? When did he start attending balls again?" "I've never seen her before." Lady Pemberton materialized beside them, resplendent in silver silk and enough sapphires to fund a small war. "Perfect timing. Lord Cavendish is about to open the dancing." She adjusted Elara's necklace with the precision of a general checking ammunition. "Remember, dignified, happy, slightly overwhelmed. And for heaven's sake, don't step on his feet. The waltz is in 3/4 time, not common time." "I know how to count," Elara said. "Then prove it." The orchestra began the opening strains. Couples moved toward the floor. Alistair turned to her, and for a moment she saw something flicker in his eyes. Hesitation, maybe, or the recognition that once they did this, there was no undoing it. "Last chance," he said quietly. "We can still walk out of here." "And go where?" "Anywhere. I'll still settle the debts. You won't have to do this." Elara looked at him, really looked. He was giving her an out. Even now, with his mother watching and society waiting and everything arranged, he was giving her a choice. "Ask me to dance," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Relief? Respect? She couldn't tell. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, loud enough for the nearby couples to hear, "would you do me the honor?" "I'd be delighted, Your Grace." His hand settled at her waist. Hers rested on his shoulder. The orchestra swelled into the waltz, and they moved. Elara had told him she was terrible at dancing, which was true. She'd had exactly 6 lessons before her father died and the money ran out. But Alistair led like he did everything else, precisely, confidently, with no room for error. She followed because not following would have meant crashing into other couples, and after 3 rotations she found the rhythm. "You lied," Alistair said. "You can dance." "I can count. There's a difference." Not much of one, apparently. They turned through the crowd, and Elara became aware of eyes on them. Everyone watching, everyone wondering. The attention felt like heat from a fire, uncomfortable, inescapable, threatening to burn if she got too close. "They're staring," she said. "They're always staring. Ignore them." "Easy for you to say. You're used to it." "I'm used to it because I learned to ignore it. You will too." The waltz built toward its crescendo. Alistair's hand tightened slightly at her waist, pulling her infinitesimally closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated that probably had a name in French. "When the music stops," he said, "stay close to me. Cavendish will make the announcement. Everyone will react. Don't flinch." "I won't." "Promise?" "I don't make promises I can't keep." "Good. Neither do I." The final bars of the waltz faded, the orchestra stilled. In the sudden quiet, Lord Cavendish's voice boomed across the ballroom. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen, if I might have your attention." The crowd turned. Elara felt her heart kick into a faster rhythm. "It is my great pleasure," Cavendish continued, "to announce the engagement of His Grace, the Duke of Thornvale, to Miss Elara Whitcomb. May we offer them our warmest congratulations." For one long, suspended moment, the ballroom was silent. Then it erupted. Applause, gasps, immediate furious whispering. Elara felt the attention intensify, felt every eye in the room dissect her dress, her face, her posture, her worth. She kept her expression serene, kept her hand steady on Alistair's arm, kept breathing. "Well done," Alistair murmured. "You didn't flinch. The night's not over yet." People swarmed them. Congratulations, questions, barely concealed curiosity dressed up as politeness. Alistair fielded it all with practiced ease, giving just enough information to satisfy without revealing anything real. Yes, they'd been acquainted for some time. No, the wedding date wasn't set yet. Yes, it was rather sudden, wasn't it? Elara smiled, nodded, and said as little as possible. Lady Pemberton's coaching kicked in, dignified, happy, slightly overwhelmed. She could do this. She was doing this. Then Vivienne appeared, eyes wide with shock. "Elara? Engaged? When were you going to tell me?" "I wanted to be sure first," Elara said, the lie smooth as silk. "It all happened rather quickly." "Quickly? You didn't say anything at Ashford's ball. That was a week ago." "Sometimes these things develop faster than expected." Vivienne looked between Elara and Alistair, her expression caught between delight and suspicion. "But you barely know each other." "We know each other well enough," Alistair said. His voice was polite but final, the tone of someone ending a conversation. "If you'll excuse us, Miss Hartley, I believe supper is being served." He guided Elara away before Vivienne could press further. They moved through the crowd toward the dining room, and Elara realized her hands were shaking. "You're doing fine," Alistair said quietly. "I just lied to my cousin." "You're going to lie to everyone, that was the agreement." "I know, it just feels wrong? Necessary, which is worse." They reached the dining room, where tables had been arranged for the supper course. Lady Pemberton had orchestrated the seating, naturally, and Elara found herself between Alistair and an elderly baroness who immediately launched into a detailed history of her own wedding 40 years prior. Across the table, a woman in purple silk studied Elara with unconcealed interest. "Miss Whitcomb," she said, interrupting the Baroness mid-sentence. "Lady Marchmore." "I don't believe we've been introduced." "A pleasure," Elara said. "I knew your father, briefly, before his unfortunate passing." Lady Marchmore's smile was sharp. "Such a tragedy. And his debts, of course. Those must have been difficult for your family." The table went quiet. Elara felt blood rush to her face, but kept her voice level. "We managed." "I'm sure you did. How fortunate that you found such an advantageous match." Her gaze slid to Alistair. "One might almost call it providential." Alistair set down his wineglass with a quiet click that somehow commanded attention. "One might," he said, "if one were inclined toward unnecessary speculation. But I prefer to think of it as two people recognizing mutual value. Novel concept, I know." Lady Marchmore's smile froze. Several people around the table suddenly found their soup fascinating. "Of course, Your Grace, I meant no offense." "Then don't give any." The conversation shifted to safer topics. The weather, the latest theatrical production, Lord Somebody's recent appointment to something. Elara ate mechanically, aware of Lady Marchmore's gaze returning to her periodically, assessing, calculating. When supper ended, Alistair offered his arm. "Walk with me. You need air." They slipped out through the terrace doors into the garden. The night was cool, almost cold, and Elara's breath misted in the air. She could still hear the music from the ballroom, muted by distance and glass. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have handled that better." "You handled it perfectly. You kept your composure." "She insulted me." "Insulted my father." "She was testing you, seeing if you'd break." Alistair leaned against the terrace railing, looking out at the dark garden. "You didn't. That's what matters." "Is it always going to be like this? People questioning why we're together?" "Yes, until they get bored or find something else to talk about." He glanced at her. "Can you handle it?" Elara thought about her father's creditors, about the letters demanding payment, about her mother's hands shaking as she tried to calculate which bills to pay. She thought about counting chandeliers and borrowed dresses and the particular humiliation of being poor in a world designed for the rich. "I can handle it," she said. "I've handled worse. Worse than Lady Marchmore. I find that hard to believe." "You've never been poor. There's a kind of cruelty in poverty that makes society gossip look gentle." Alistair was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "No, I haven't been poor. But I've been trapped in expectations that didn't fit, forced to perform a role I never wanted, watched by people who cared more about my title than anything real about me." He turned to face her. "Different prisons, same lock." Elara looked at him, at this duke with his power and wealth and freedom, and realized he actually understood. Not the money part, maybe, but the rest of it. The performance. The trap. "We should go back inside," she said, "before people notice we're gone." "Let them notice. We're engaged. We're allowed to want privacy." "Are we? Or is that another thing we're just pretending?" His mouth curved. "You're going to be difficult about this, aren't you? You hired me for my honesty. Can't complain when I use it. I didn't hire you. My mother did. Same difference. Not even remotely." They went back inside, back into the noise and heat and watching eyes. The rest of the evening blurred. More congratulations, more questions, more careful navigation through conversations designed to trap or expose. By the time the carriage arrived at midnight, Elara felt like she'd run a marathon while juggling knives. In the carriage, she sagged against the velvet seat. That was exhausting. "That was easy," Alistair said. "Wait until the dinner parties start. Those are worse." "How are they worse?" "Smaller groups, longer conversations, harder to avoid direct questions." He loosened his cravat, the first casual gesture she'd seen him make all night. "We'll need to practice more. Get our story straight on everything." "What story?" "We've been quietly corresponding. We fell in love. We're getting married eventually. What else is there?" "How we met. First impressions. When I proposed. Where. What you said, what I said. The ring. Why you're not wearing it yet." He ticked items off on his fingers. "People will ask. We need consistent answers." "You're very thorough." "I don't do things halfway." The carriage rolled through London's quiet streets. Elara watched the city pass, dark windows, sleeping houses, the occasional light burning late. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a few miles away, lies were being constructed with architectural precision. At Thornvale House, she went straight to her room. Peters helped her out of the dress, unpinned her hair, and disappeared with murmured goodnights. Elara sat at the writing desk in her nightgown and tried to compose a letter to her mother. The announcement went well. Everyone was very kind. Lies. All lies. She crumpled the paper and started again. The evening was successful. Alistair was attentive and proper. You would have been proud. More lies, but at least these ones served a purpose. She sealed the letter and left it for the morning post, then climbed into the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Her mind kept replaying the evening, Lady Marchmore's calculating eyes, Vivian's confusion, the weight of all those watching stares. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 2. Elara gave up on sleep and went to the library, thinking she'd find a book to distract herself. Alistair was already there, reading by lamplight in his shirt sleeves. He looked up when she entered. "Can't sleep either." "Too much stimulation." "Welcome to society. It's always like this." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. We might as well work on the story while we're both awake." Elara sat, tucking her dressing gown around her legs. It felt oddly intimate, this late-night meeting in their nightclothes, but also strangely comfortable, like they'd moved past the formal performance into something more honest. "Where did we meet?" Alistair asked. "Your mother's charity event, 3 months ago. You were there reluctantly, I was there with my cousin. We talked about the inadequacy of current poverty relief programs." "Good. Specific but not verifiable. First impressions?" "You thought I was opinionated. I thought you were arrogant." "Accurate on both counts. When did that change?" "We started corresponding. Letters. You were less arrogant in writing. I was less defensive." "When did I propose?" Elara paused. 2 weeks ago. In the garden at Thornvale House. Evening. You didn't get on one knee because you said it was theatrical, and we both hate theatrics. Alistair smiled. I like that detail. What did you say? Yes, obviously. Did you cry? No, I laughed. You asked why. I said, because it was the most unromantic proposal I'd ever heard, and you said you'd be happy to revise it if I wanted something more conventional, and I said no. It was perfect exactly as it was. That's... He stopped, looking at her with something close to surprise. That's actually good. Believable. Consistent with how we'd actually behave. That's because I'm imagining how it would actually happen, if it were real. Which it's not. Which it's not, she agreed. But the best lies are the ones closest to truth. They worked through more details. Where they'd like to marry, small ceremony, country estate. When, next spring, maybe summer, what kind of life they'd build. She'd manage the charitable foundations. He'd focus on Parliament. The story took shape, piece by piece, until it felt almost real. What about after? Elara asked. When the 3 months end? We grow apart, quietly. Mutual decision. No scandal, no drama. You'll receive your compensation, I'll return to my normal life. Everyone moves on. Just like that. Just like that. It sounded so simple, so clean. Elara wondered if anything in life ever actually ended that cleanly. It's late, Alistair said, closing his book. We should sleep. Tomorrow starts the real work. What's tomorrow? Visits, calls. Everyone who couldn't corner us tonight will try tomorrow. We'll need to be perfect. Elara stood, tightening her dressing gown belt. No pressure then. You survived tonight, you'll survive tomorrow. You sound certain. I am. You're tougher than you look, Miss Whitcomb. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, though I suppose it could be both. She left him in the library, climbed back to her room, and this time managed to sleep. Her dreams were full of watching eyes and calculating smiles, and the feeling of performing on a stage where one wrong step meant falling into an abyss. The next morning began the siege. Calling cards arrived by the dozen. Invitations flooded in. The drawing room became a battlefield where Elara and Alistair received an endless parade of visitors, all curious, all probing, all looking for cracks in the illusion. Such a whirlwind romance, Lady Pemberton's friend Mrs. Hartwick said, sipping tea with delicate precision. How did you manage to keep it quiet? We're both private people, Elara said. It seemed natural to keep things between ourselves until we were certain. And now you're certain? Completely. Alistair's hand covered hers on the sofa arm, a casual gesture, possessive without being obvious. When you know, you know. Mrs. Hartwick smiled, but her eyes stayed calculating. And the wedding? Spring, I hear? We haven't finalized the date, Alistair said. There's no rush. Of course not. Though at your age, Your Grace, I imagine your mother must be eager for grandchildren. The conversation shifted, probed, circled back. They answered questions, deflected others, maintained the performance with exhausting precision. By the time Mrs. Hartwick left, Elara felt wrung out. 4 more visits scheduled this afternoon, Alistair said, checking the cards Graves had arranged on the table. Then dinner at the Ashfords tonight. Tomorrow, Lady Pemberton's luncheon. Thursday. Stop, please. Elara pressed her fingers to her temples. One day at a time. That's not how society works. Everything overlaps. Then society is exhausting. Yes, that's why I avoid it. Except now you can't. Except now I can't, he agreed. Because of you. Because of your mother's scheme, I'm just the instrument. You're a very effective instrument. The afternoon visits were worse than the morning. More pointed questions. More barely concealed skepticism. Lady Marchmore appeared during the 3rd visit. All false warmth and sharp observations. You make such an interesting pair, she said. So unexpected. Love often is, Elara replied. Love. Lady Marchmore's smile was thin. Yes, of course. Though some might say practicality played a role. Your family's situation being what it is. Alistair stood abruptly. I'm afraid we're out of time, Lady Marchmore. Another appointment. Graves will show you out. After she left, Elara sank into the sofa. She knows something's wrong. She suspects. That's different from knowing. Is it? because it feels the same. Suspicion without proof is just gossip. She can't prove anything. Alistair sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. But we need to be more careful, more convincing. How much more convincing can we be? Physical affection. We're too formal. Engaged couples touch more. Stand closer. I need to, He reached for her hand, hesitated. May I? You're asking permission to touch my hand? We agreed on honesty in private. That includes asking. Elara held out her hand. Alistair took it, his fingers warm against hers, and for a moment they just sat there, holding hands like awkward children. This feels ridiculous, she said. It feels necessary. We need to get comfortable with proximity. He shifted closer, his shoulder brushing hers. In public, I'll need to touch your waist, put my hand on your back, stand close enough that people believe we're intimate. We are intimate, just not the way they think. Exactly. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a small gesture, testing. Does this bother you? No. Should it? Some people don't like being touched. I'm not some people. His mouth curved. No, you're definitely not. They practiced, standing close, his arm around her waist, her hand on his shoulder. It felt awkward at first, mechanical, like learning dance steps, but gradually it became easier, less strange, almost natural. Better, Alistair said. Now when we're in public, it won't look rehearsed. Everything about this is rehearsed. That's the point. Rehearse until it looks unrehearsed. That night's dinner at the Ashfords was the first test of their improved performance. Elara wore the burgundy dress Madame Laurent had declared her triumph, and when Alistair saw her, something flickered in his eyes. What? She asked. Nothing. You look fine. Fine? Appropriate. Good. Ready. He offered his arm. Stop fishing for compliments. I wasn't fishing. I was checking for criticism. No criticism. You look perfect. The dinner was brutal. 12 courses, 30 guests, endless conversation that circled around them like sharks around chum. But this time, when Alistair's hand settled at her waist as they moved to the drawing room, it felt practiced. When he leaned close to murmur something during the card games, it looked intimate. When she laughed at his dry observation about Lord Pemberton's terrible whist strategy, it sounded genuine, because it was genuine. Somehow, in the weeks since she'd moved to Thornvale House, they'd developed an actual rapport. The arguments about philosophy had turned into debates she looked forward to. The shared meals had become comfortable rather than awkward. The proximity practice had made her aware of things she hadn't noticed before, how he smelled like cedar and parchment, how his hands were surprisingly elegant for someone so severe, how his rare smiles transformed his entire face. It was dangerous, this comfort, dangerous to forget they were performing, dangerous to let the lie feel too real. On the carriage ride home, Alistair leaned back against the seat, eyes closed. That went well? Did it? I felt like I was being dissected. You were. But you held up, no mistakes. He opened his eyes, looked at her. You're getting good at this. At lying? At survival. The word hit harder than expected, because that's what this was, survival. Not romance, not even friendship, really. Just two people trapped in circumstances they hadn't chosen, making the best of a bad situation. When do we stop? Elara asked. Stop what? Pretending. When do we get to just exist without performing? In about 2 months and 3 weeks. His voice was matter of fact. Until then, we perform. That's the arrangement. Right. The arrangement. She looked out the carriage window at London passing by and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. This was always temporary. She'd known that from the start. The money, the security, the illusion, all of it had an expiration date. Forgetting that would be the biggest mistake she could make. At Thornvale House, she went to her room without the usual library visit. She needed distance, needed to remember why she was here. The money, her mother's security, her family's debts. Not because she enjoyed Alistair's company or looked forward to their arguments or had started noticing the way lamplight caught in his dark hair. A knock at her door. Peter's probably come to help her undress. Come in. But it was Alistair, still in his evening clothes, holding an envelope. This arrived while we were out. It's from your mother. Elara took it, noting the familiar handwriting. She broke the seal, read quickly. Her mother was well, grateful, overwhelmed by Lady Pemberton's generosity. She wanted to visit London, to meet Alistair properly, to begin planning the wedding. Problem? Alistair asked. My mother wants to visit, to meet you, to... She gestured helplessly at the letter. She thinks this is real. Of course she does. That's what we told her. But she's my mother. She'll know. She'll see through it. Will she? Or will she see what she wants to see? Her daughter rescued from poverty, secure with a good match? Elara sank onto the bed. I hate this. I hate lying to her. Then tell her the truth. You know I can't. Why not? Because it would break her heart. Because she's already fragile enough. Because the truth would destroy the only good thing she thinks has happened since my father died. Alistair leaned against the doorframe. So you'll keep lying, for her sake? Yes. That's very kind of you. It's not kind. It's necessary. She looked up at him. There's a difference. He held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you're better at this than I expected. The deception. Most people crack under the pressure. Maybe I'm cracking and you just can't tell. Maybe. Or maybe you're stronger than you think. He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Elara stared at the letter in her hands and tried to decide if she felt stronger or just more trapped. The next weeks blurred together. Dinners, balls, teas, endless performance. The lies stacked up like bricks in a wall, each one making the structure more solid, more real, more impossible to tear down without everything collapsing. Her mother visited in late April. Elara met her at the train station with Alistair, and watching her mother's face light up when she saw them together was like swallowing glass. Oh, my darling girl. Her mother embraced her, tears already forming. And your Grace, how can I ever thank you for making my daughter so happy? She makes herself happy, Alistair said smoothly. I'm just fortunate enough to witness it. Perfect. Exactly what a doting fiancé would say, and completely, entirely false. They took her mother to tea, showed her the house, let her exclaim over the gardens and the artwork and the overwhelming evidence of wealth and security. She held Elara's hand and whispered how proud she was, how relieved, how wonderful everything had turned out. That night, after her mother had retired to the guest room, Elara found Alistair in the library. I can't do this anymore. He looked up from his reading. Yes, you can. You don't understand. She was so happy, so grateful, and it's all a lie. Yes, I'm aware. He set down his book. But it's a lie that's keeping her secure and you solvent. Would you prefer to tell her the truth? Watch her realize her daughter sold 3 months of her life for money? That's not what this is. Isn't it? Elara's hands clenched into fists. You're cruel. I'm honest. There's a difference. He stood, moved closer. You made a choice. A hard choice. Now you have to live with it. We both do. Do you ever regret it? Regret what? This. The arrangement. Forcing yourself to pretend. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Sometimes. When it feels too real and I remember it isn't. When I catch myself actually enjoying your company and have to remind myself this has an expiration date. He met her eyes. But mostly, no. Because the alternative was worse. What alternative? Continuing to let my mother orchestrate my life. Letting society speculate about why I won't marry. Fighting the same battles over and over until I'm too exhausted to fight anymore. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so casual and intimate it made her breath catch. This way. At least I get 3 months of intelligent conversation before going back to the solitude I prefer. His hand lingered near her face. Elara should have stepped back, should have reinforced the boundaries, should have remembered this was performance. Instead, she leaned slightly into his touch. This is dangerous, she whispered. What is? Forgetting it's not real. Then we'll remind each other. But he didn't move his hand. Consider this practice. For when we're in public. We're not in public now. No, we're not. They stood there, close enough to feel each other's warmth, close enough that one small movement would close the distance completely. The library was quiet except for the clock ticking and their breathing and the weight of everything they weren't saying. Alistair's thumb brushed her cheekbone. I should go. Yes, you should. Neither of them moved. Then footsteps in the hall, a servant passing, probably, and they broke apart like guilty children. Alistair stepped back, his expression shuddering. Good night, Miss Whitcomb. Good night, Your Grace. Formal, distant, safe. Elara went to her room and lay awake for hours, feeling the ghost of his touch on her face and trying to convince herself it meant nothing. She failed. The realization came slowly over the next 2 weeks, creeping in through small moments she couldn't explain away. The way her pulse jumped when Alistair entered a room, how she'd started listening for his footsteps in the hallway, the fact that their debates about political reform had become the best part of her day, and their silences in the library felt comfortable rather than awkward. She was developing feelings for a man who'd hired her to pretend. It was idiotic, dangerous, exactly the kind of mistake that would destroy everything. Elara tried to create distance. She spent more time in her rooms, declined his invitations to ride through Hyde Park, made excuses to avoid their evening conversations. If Alistair noticed, he didn't comment, just continued his routine of reading in the library and attending to parliamentary business while she hid in her wing like a coward. But society didn't allow for distance, not when you were engaged to a duke. The invitations kept coming, the performances continued, and every time Alistair's hand settled at her waist or his fingers brushed hers, or he leaned close to murmur some dry observation, Elara felt the walls she was trying to build crumble a little more. It was at the Duchess of Ashford's garden party in mid-May that everything started unraveling. The afternoon was perfect. Warm sun, manicured lawns, ladies in pastel silks drifting between rose bushes like expensive butterflies. Elara wore a cream dress with green embroidery that Madame Laurent had declared spring personified, and she felt out of place in a way she hadn't in weeks. The comfort she'd found at Thornvale House didn't translate here, among these women who'd been born into this world instead of stumbling into it through desperation. You look tense, Alistair said, offering her a glass of champagne. I'm fine. You're gripping that program like it insulted your family. Elara loosened her fingers, realizing she'd crumpled the gilt-edged card listing the afternoon's entertainment. I don't like garden parties. No one likes garden parties. They're designed to be uncomfortable. He guided her toward a quieter section of the garden, away from the main crowd. What's wrong? Nothing. Don't lie. You're terrible at it when it's just us. That stung because it was true. She could lie to society all day, but with Alistair, the performance fell apart. I'm tired, she said, which was also true. Tired of performing. Tired of watching every word. Tired of... Me? No, never you. The words came out too honest, too raw. She saw his expression shift, saw him hear what she hadn't meant to reveal. Elara, Your Grace, Lady Marchmore appeared from behind a hedge like an ambush predator. And Miss Whitcomb. How lovely you both look, so devoted to each other. Her smile was vicious. Elara's stomach dropped. Lady Marchmore, Alistair said, his voice cooling to the temperature he used on people he wanted to freeze out. Enjoying the party? Immensely, though I must confess I've been hearing the most interesting rumors. She sipped her champagne, eyes glittering. About the nature of your engagement. Rumors are generally uninteresting, Alistair said, and usually false. These ones suggest your betrothal was arranged rather hastily. Some even say it's a business arrangement designed to rescue Miss Whitcomb's family from financial ruin. She turned to Elara. Can you imagine? People can be so cruel with their speculation. The garden seemed to tilt. Elara felt blood drain from her face, felt her carefully constructed composure crack. People speculate about everything, she managed. It's tedious. Oh, I agree completely. Though in this case, the speculation is quite detailed. Dates, amounts, even the terms of the arrangement. Lady Marchmore's smile sharpened. One might wonder where such specific information originated. Alistair's hand found Elara's, squeezed once. A warning or reassurance, she couldn't tell. One might wonder, he said, why you're so invested in our private affairs, Lady Marchmore. Is your own life so dull that you must invent drama in others? Not invented, Your Grace. Merely observed. She set down her champagne glass. I have a friend who works at the firm that handled the debt settlement. She mentioned a rather unusual transaction involving the Whitcomb estate and your mother's accounts, all happening within days of your engagement announcement. The ground was definitely tilting now. Elara tried to think, tried to calculate how to salvage this, but her mind had gone blank with panic. Financial transactions between families aren't unusual when an engagement occurs, Alistair said. His voice was steady, but Elara could feel the tension in his grip. My mother was generous enough to help Elara's family during a difficult time. That's hardly scandalous. No, of course not. Merely convenient. Lady Marchmore's gaze shifted between them. I'm sure the timing is coincidental, just as I'm sure your sudden affection for each other is entirely genuine and not at all performed. Are you suggesting something specific? Alistair asked, or simply enjoying the sound of your own insinuation? I'm suggesting nothing. I'm simply sharing what others are whispering. She smiled. You know how society talks. Once doubt takes root, it spreads like weeds. By tomorrow, everyone will be wondering if the Duke of Thornvale's engagement is nothing more than an elaborate deception. She drifted away into the crowd, leaving destruction in her wake. Elara couldn't breathe. The garden pressed in. Too many people, too many eyes, too much exposure. She pulled her hand from Alistair's. I need to leave. We can't leave. It would look like guilt. I don't care how it looks. I can't. I need. Elara. His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Breathe. We're going to handle this. How? She knows. Everyone's going to know. She suspects. That's different. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. We stay. We act like nothing's wrong. We're so obviously in love that her rumors seem ridiculous. But we're not. Then we pretend better than we ever have before. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative or practiced. It was desperate and claiming and designed to convince every person in visual range that they were exactly what they claimed to be. Elara froze for half a second, then her hands fisted in his jacket and she kissed him back because what else could she do? The performance demanded it, except it didn't feel like performance. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark and his breathing unsteady. There, he said quietly. Now they have something to talk about besides rumors. Elara's lips felt burned. Her heart was trying to escape her chest. Around them, the garden party had gone silent, everyone staring, everyone witnessing. Lady Pemberton materialized at Alistair's elbow, her expression frozen somewhere between approval and fury. Well, she said, that was certainly decisive. Mother. Alistair's voice was level, but Elara could hear the edge beneath. We need to talk. Privately. They retreated to a small parlor in the house. Lady Pemberton closed the door with a click that sounded like a gunshot. Marchmore knows, she said, or suspects enough that it amounts to the same thing. Yes. How? She has a friend at the law firm. Someone talked. Lady Pemberton's expression went cold. I'll handle the firm. What concerns me is the damage. If this gets out, if society believes the engagement is false, then we prove it isn't, Alistair interrupted. How exactly? By kissing in gardens? That's desperation, not proof. By getting married. Actually married. Before the rumors solidify. The room went silent. Elara's brain caught up slowly. What? We announce the wedding date. Soon, 3 weeks from now. We marry before anyone can prove the engagement was arranged. Alistair turned to his mother. Can you organize it that quickly? I can organize anything quickly. The question is whether you've both lost your minds. Lady Pemberton looked between them. This was meant to be temporary. 3 months of pretending, then a quiet separation. If you actually marry, then the arrangement becomes real, the rumors become irrelevant, and everyone gets what they wanted. Alistair's jaw was set. Elara's family stays secure. You get your Duchess. I get society off my back. It's logical. It's insane, Elara said. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. We can't actually get married. Why not? Because this isn't real. Because you don't want to be married. Because I can't. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the 1,000 reasons this was impossible. Can you think of a better solution? Alistair asked. Because I'm open to alternatives, but we're out of time. Marchmore won't wait. She'll spread this everywhere, and once she does, no amount of denying will undo the damage. Lady Pemberton moved to the window, staring out at the garden party, continuing in blissful ignorance below. If you do this, she said slowly, you're committing to a lifetime, not 3 months, not a convenient arrangement with an exit clause. An actual marriage, legally binding, permanent. I understand that. Do you? Because your entire adult life has been about avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement. My entire adult life has been about maintaining control. Alistair's voice was quiet but firm. This is me maintaining control. On my terms, not society's, not yours. Lady Pemberton turned back to face them. Her expression was unreadable. And you, Miss Whitcomb? Are you prepared to commit to a lifetime with a man you barely know? To become a duchess, manage estates, navigate a world you weren't born into? Because once you do this, there's no going back. Elara looked at Alistair, at this man who'd become her opponent in philosophical debates and her ally in social warfare, who made her laugh with dry observations and challenged her assumptions and somehow, without her noticing when it happened, had become the person she most looked forward to seeing. This was insane. Reckless. The biggest gamble she'd ever taken. But walking away meant watching the lie explode, meant losing her family's security, meant proving Lady Marchmore right. And more than any of that, though she barely wanted to admit it, walking away meant losing Alistair. Yes, she said. I'll do it. Lady Pemberton's eyes narrowed. You're certain? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Then I'll make the arrangements. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, you're both either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which. After she left, Elara and Alistair stood in the silent parlor, the weight of what they'd just committed to pressing down like a physical force. 3 weeks, Elara said. 3 weeks. We should probably talk about this, about what it means, about later. Right now we need to go back out there and convince everyone that kiss was the natural expression of two people desperately in love. He offered his arm. Can you do that? I just agreed to marry you based on a lie that's spiraling out of control. I can do anything. His mouth quirked. That's what I'm counting on. They returned to the garden party. The whispers followed them like smoke, but Elara held her head high and Alistair kept his hand possessively at her waist, and by the time they left 2 hours later, the predominant rumor was no longer about arranged engagements, but about the Duke of Thornvale being so besotted he couldn't keep his hands off his fiancée. At least that part was half true. The carriage ride home was silent. Elara stared out the window, watching London blur past, trying to process what had just happened, what she'd just agreed to. Are you going to regret this? Alistair asked quietly. Probably. Are you? I don't know yet. Honest. I promised you honesty. That's one thing I can actually deliver. Back at Thornvale House, Elara went straight to her room. Peters helped her out of the cream dress and left her alone, and Elara sat at her writing desk trying to compose a letter to her mother. The wedding has been moved up. 3 weeks from now. Everything's happening so quickly. She couldn't write the truth. Couldn't explain that this marriage was damage control, a desperate grab for credibility before the lies collapsed entirely. Her mother would be thrilled, would see it as romantic and impulsive and everything a love match should be. The irony was suffocating. A knock at her door. She knew it was Alistair before he spoke. Can I come in? It's your house. He entered still in his evening clothes, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed her one. You look like you need this. I need several of these. They drank in silence. The whiskey burned going down, which felt appropriate. We should talk, Alistair said finally, about expectations, about what this marriage actually looks like. Beyond the legally binding lifetime commitment part? Beyond that. He sat in the chair across from her desk. We maintain separate lives, separate interests. I'll handle the estates and Parliament, you'll manage the charitable foundations and whatever else you want to pursue. We're partners, not prisoners. Very romantic. We're past romance. This is about survival and strategy. Is it? The whiskey made her brave. Because that kiss didn't feel strategic. His expression shifted. That kiss was necessary for the performance. Was it? Or was it something else? Don't do this, Elara. Do what? Ask honest questions? You're the one who insisted on honesty between us. Honesty about the arrangement, not about... He stopped, looked away. This is complicated enough without adding emotions into it. Too late. The emotions are already there. She set down her glass. At least mine are. I don't know about yours. Mine are... He dragged a hand through his hair, destroying its careful arrangement. Irrelevant. We're doing this to protect the arrangement, not because of some sudden revelation of feelings. Are we? Because from where I'm sitting, we could have found other solutions. We could have weathered the scandal, let the rumors die down, ended things quietly like we planned. Instead, you proposed actual marriage within 5 minutes of being confronted. Because it was the logical solution. Was it logical? Or did you want a reason to make this real? He stood abruptly. You're reading too much into a tactical decision. Am I? She stood too, closing the distance between them. Then tell me that kiss meant nothing. Tell me these past 2 months have been purely transactional. Tell me you feel nothing when we argue about Mill versus Hume, or when I catch you almost smiling at my sarcasm, or when we sit in the library at midnight talking about nothing important. Those things are comfortable, pleasant, not grounds for marriage. No, desperation and scandal are grounds for marriage. Comfort and pleasure are just inconvenient complications. They stood close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes, could watch him war with whatever he was refusing to say. If I admit there are feelings, he said slowly, it changes everything. It makes this vulnerable instead of controlled. And I don't do vulnerable. Neither do I. But here we are anyway. His hand came up, cupped her face the way he had in the garden. This is a mistake. Probably. We should maintain boundaries, keep this professional. Agreed. Neither of them moved. Then he kissed her again, and this time there was no audience, no performance, no tactical reason. Just the two of them, and the truth they'd been avoiding, and the terrifying recognition that somewhere in the past 2 months, the lie had become real. When they broke apart, Alistair rested his forehead against hers. We're going to ruin this, he said. The arrangement. Each other. Too late. We're already committed. We could still... No, we couldn't. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. We're past the point of exit strategies, so we might as well be honest about what this actually is. And what is it? I don't know yet, but it's not nothing, and it's not just arrangement. He kissed her again, softer this time, like he was testing the truth of her words, like he was trying to decide if this was salvation or disaster. 3 weeks, he murmured against her mouth. Then there's no going back. I know. Are you sure about this? No. Are you? No. He smiled, barely. But I'm doing it anyway. He left before things could escalate further, and Elara sat back down at her desk with shaking hands. The letter to her mother lay unfinished, the lies half-formed. She crumpled it and started again. We're getting married in 3 weeks. I know it's sudden, but when you're certain about something, there's no point in waiting. I'm happier than I've been in years. Please don't worry about me. Everything is going to be fine. At least some of that was true. The next 3 weeks were chaos. Lady Pemberton descended on the wedding preparations like a military commander organizing a campaign. Guest lists, flower arrangements, menu selections, seating charts, every detail scrutinized and perfected. The ceremony would be at Thornvale's country estate, intimate but grand, exclusive but impressive. This needs to look like a love match, Lady Pemberton said, reviewing fabric samples for the reception decorations. Not a hasty cover-up. Isn't that exactly what it is? Elara asked. Yes, which is why appearances matter more than ever. The rumors hadn't died down. If anything, they'd intensified. Society was divided, half convinced the engagement was genuine, half certain it was calculated. Lady Marchmore smiled like a cat who'd found the cream, dropping hints and insinuations at every opportunity. Let them talk, Alistair said one night over dinner. In 3 weeks we'll be married, and they'll look foolish. Or we'll be married and they'll be right about us being desperate. Does it matter? Either way, we win. Do we? Because from here it feels like we're just digging ourselves deeper. He reached across the table, took her hand. Then we dig together. The touching had become frequent, natural, not just in public but in private too, casual brushes of fingers, his hand at her back, her shoulder against his arm. The boundaries they'd maintained so carefully had dissolved without either of them acknowledging it. They were playing with fire, and both of them knew it. 5 days before the wedding, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Elara received a letter from Vivian. She opened it in the morning room over breakfast, expecting the usual gossip about society events. Instead, she got devastation. Dearest Elara, I debated writing this for weeks, but I cannot in good conscience stay silent. I know about the arrangement between you and the Duke. I know about the debts, the contract, the 3-month agreement that was supposed to end quietly. Lady Marchmore approached me at the Ashford ball. She had documentation, copies of the contract, correspondence between you and Lady Pemberton, financial records. She offered to keep it quiet if I helped her gather more evidence against you. I refused, obviously, but I cannot unknow what I've learned. This marriage you're rushing into, is it real, or are you compounding one lie with another? I love you, cousin, but I'm terrified you're making a mistake you can't undo. Please, talk to me before you do something irreversible. Yours, Vivian. The letter slipped from Elara's fingers. Her vision tunneled. Everything she'd built, everything she'd carefully constructed, was crumbling. Alistair looked up from his newspaper. What's wrong? Vivian knows. Marchmore showed her the contract. That's impossible. The contract is locked in my mother's safe. Then someone copied it, or Marchmore has sources we didn't account for. Elara's hands were shaking. She's been gathering evidence, building a case. 5 days before the wedding, and our entire lie is about to go public. Alistair set down the newspaper very carefully. We'll sue for slander. With what defense? Everything she's saying is true. Not everything. The engagement might have started as arrangement, but we're actually getting married. That's real. Is it? Or are we just too deep in the lie to find our way out? The question hung between them. Alistair's expression went carefully blank. The face he wore when negotiating in Parliament, when defending against attacks. What are you asking me, Elara? I'm asking if this is real. If what's happening between us is genuine or just two people convincing themselves they're in love to justify a terrible decision. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. She stood, needing distance. Because if we're doing this, if we're actually getting married, I need to know it's not just damage control. I need to know you actually want this. Want me. Alistair rose, moved around the table. You want honesty? Fine. I don't know what this is. I don't know if what I feel is love or just comfort or the byproduct of spending 2 months in close quarters with someone who challenges me intellectually. I don't trust emotions. I don't trust anything I can't quantify or control. That's not good enough. It's all I have. He reached for her, but she stepped back. What do you want me to say? That I'm madly in love with you? That this is some fairy tale romance? I'm not built that way, Elara. I don't do grand gestures or declarations. I do logic and strategy and calculated risk. And that's what I am? A calculated risk? No. You're the only thing in my life that hasn't been calculated, and it terrifies me. The confession hung in the air between them, raw, unguarded, more honest than anything he'd said before. I'm terrified too, Elara said quietly, because I did the thing we specifically agreed not to do. I fell in love with you. Somewhere between the arguments about philosophy and the midnight conversations and the practice touching that stopped feeling like practice. And I don't know if you feel the same, or if I'm just convenient, or if this entire thing is me projecting meaning onto an arrangement that was never meant to have any. Alistair stared at her. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he crossed the distance between them and kissed her like a drowning man finding air. I don't know how to do this, he said against her mouth. I don't know how to be in love. But whatever this is, whatever we are, it's the most real thing I've experienced in 31 years of careful control. That's not a declaration of love. It's the closest I can get. Is it enough? Elara kissed him back, tasting desperation and truth, and the terrifying leap they were both taking. It has to be, she said. They spent the next hour planning, not for the wedding, that was already arranged, for the scandal that was coming, for Marchmore's inevitable attack, for the moment when their private arrangement would become public spectacle. We go on the offensive, Alistair decided. We don't wait for Marchmore to release the information. We control the narrative. How? We tell the truth, part of it anyway. He paced the morning room, thinking aloud. We admit the engagement began as an arrangement to help your family. We frame it as my mother introducing us, me helping a woman I was interested in, the relationship developing naturally from there. We make it a love story that started practically but became real. Will anyone believe that? Some will, some won't, but it's better than letting Marchmore define the story. They took the plan to Lady Pemberton, who listened with the expression of someone watching a carriage crash in slow motion. This is incredibly risky, she said when they'd finished. If you miscalculate, if society decides you're lying, they already think we're lying, Alistair interrupted. This way, we admit enough truth to seem honest while protecting the parts that matter. And the contract? The financial arrangements? Private family business. Helping a future daughter-in-law's family is hardly scandalous. It is when it's documented in legal terms that make it look like a transaction. Then we'll weather the scandal. Together. He looked at Elara. Both of us? As partners. Lady Pemberton studied them for a long moment. You're really doing this. Actually marrying. Not for show, but for real. Yes. You're both insane. Probably, but we're committed. Then I'll support you. But understand, once you do this, once you make this public, there's no taking it back. Your reputations will be tied to this story forever. I understand, Elara said, and I'm doing it anyway. 3 days before the wedding, they released a carefully worded statement to the society papers. It acknowledged that Alistair had helped Elara's family financially, framed it as the generous act of a man courting a woman he admired, and emphasized the genuine affection that had developed between them. The response was explosive. Some papers praised the romantic honesty, others condemned the impropriety. Lady Marchmore gave an interview suggesting the entire relationship was a sham, that Elara had entrapped a duke through manipulation and debt. Society chose sides. Invitations were rescinded, friends became distant. The scandal they'd tried to prevent had arrived anyway, just wearing different clothes. 2 days before the wedding, Elara's mother arrived in hysterics. Is it true? She demanded, tears streaming down her face. Did you agree to marry him just for money? Was everything you told me a lie? Elara had prepared for this, had rehearsed the careful explanation, but facing her mother's devastation, the words stuck in her throat. It started that way, she admitted, but it's not anymore. I love him, Mother. That's real. How can I believe you? How can I believe anything? Because I'm telling you the truth now, finally, completely. Elara took her mother's hands. I made a choice to save our family. I agreed to an arrangement that felt wrong but necessary, and somewhere in the middle of performing a lie, it became real. I fell in love with him, actually genuinely in love, and he feels the same. Does he? Or is he just better at lying than you are? He's terrible at lying. That's how I know it's real. Her mother searched her face, looking for certainty, for proof, for anything to hold on to. If you're wrong, she said quietly, if this is a mistake, you'll be trapped, legally, socially, forever. I know, but I'd rather be trapped with him than free without him. It wasn't what her mother wanted to hear, but it was the truth. The day before the wedding, Alistair found Elara in the library at Thornvale's country estate, staring at the marriage license that needed both their signatures. Having second thoughts? He asked. Third and fourth thoughts, actually. I'm up to about 17 thoughts, most of them panicked. He sat beside her, took the pen from her hand. We can still stop this. Can we? Really? I can endure scandal. I've endured worse. That's not what I'm asking. She turned to face him. Do you want to stop this? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he signed his name on the license with firm, decisive strokes. No, he said. I don't want to stop this. I want to marry you. Tomorrow, in front of everyone, despite the scandal and the rumors and the fact that it started as a lie. I want to make it real. Elara took the pen. Her hand was shaking, but she signed anyway. Then let's make it real, she said. That night, she couldn't sleep. She paced her room, rehearsed vows, tried to convince herself she wasn't making the biggest mistake of her life. Every fear, every doubt, every warning she'd ignored over the past 3 months came flooding back. A soft knock at her door. Alistair, in his dressing gown, looking as unsettled as she felt. I couldn't sleep either, he said. It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding. We've already had all the bad luck. What's a little more? She let him in. They sat on her bed, shoulder to shoulder, watching the moon through the window. Are we making a terrible mistake? She asked. Probably. That's not reassuring. I'm not good at reassurance. I'm good at honesty. He took her hand. Here's the honest truth. I don't know if this will work. I don't know if we're compatible long-term or if the feelings we have now will survive actual marriage. I don't know if we can weather the scandal or if society will ever accept us. I don't know anything except that I want to try. With you. Only you. What if we fail? Then we fail together. But at least we tried something real instead of hiding in safe, calculated arrangements. Elara leaned her head against his shoulder. When did you become brave? When I met someone worth being brave for. They sat like that until dawn, watching the sun rise on their wedding day, and neither of them mentioned that in a few hours they would stand before society and make promises they'd started planning as lies, but were now desperately hoping would become truth. They sat like that until dawn, watching the sun rise on their wedding day, and neither of them mentioned that in a few hours they would stand before society and make promises they'd started planning as lies, but were now desperately hoping would become truth. The morning arrived cold and gray, threatening rain. Elara took it as either an omen or a test. She couldn't decide which. Peters and 2 other maids descended on her at 7, armed with curling irons and determination. The wedding dress hung in the corner like a ghost, ivory silk with Brussels lace, designed to make her look like she'd always belonged in this world. Madame Laurent's masterpiece, delivered 3 days ago with the pronouncement that it would silence all critics. Elara doubted silk could silence anyone, but she let them dress her anyway. By 9, she was transformed. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the girl who'd counted chandeliers at the Ashford Ball 3 months ago. This woman was polished, elegant, expensive, a duchess in waiting. You look beautiful, miss, Peter said, adjusting the veil. His grace won't know what hit him. He's seen the dress already. I had to get fitted 3 times. Seeing it hanging on a form isn't the same as seeing it on you. Peter smiled. Trust me. A knock at the door. Lady Pemberton entered, already dressed in deep blue silk, looking every inch the Dowager Duchess. The guests are arriving. We have about 40 minutes before the ceremony begins. She studied Elara with an expression that was hard to read. How are you feeling? Terrified. Good. That means you understand the magnitude of what you're doing. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, it's supposed to be honest. Lady Pemberton moved closer, her voice dropping. I pushed for this arrangement. I orchestrated the introduction, I drafted the contract, I made it impossible for you to refuse. And now you're about to marry my son, actually marry him, because I backed you both into a corner. That's one way to look at it. Is there another way? Elara met her gaze in the mirror. You gave me a choice when I had none. You offered survival when I was drowning. Everything that happened after, that was me and Alistair choosing each other. You created the opportunity, but we walked through the door ourselves. Lady Pemberton's expression softened slightly. He's different with you. Less controlled. More human. I'm not sure if that's good or bad yet. Probably both. Probably. She adjusted Elara's veil with surprising gentleness. For what it's worth, I think you'll be good for him. He needs someone who challenges him instead of just agreeing with everything he says. He needs someone who isn't afraid of him. You were afraid of him, at first. I was afraid of everything. I'm still afraid. I've just learned to do things anyway. A commotion downstairs, raised voices, doors slamming. Lady Pemberton's expression shifted from maternal to military. That better not be what I think it is. It was. They found Alistair in the entrance hall, still in his shirt sleeves, facing down Lady Marchmore and 2 men in dark suits. You need to leave, Alistair was saying, his voice ice. Now. We're not leaving until we've spoken with Miss Whitcomb. Lady Marchmore held up a document. We have evidence that this marriage is fraudulent. A contract signed by both parties outlining financial compensation for a temporary arrangement. If you proceed with this ceremony, we'll present this to the magistrate and have the marriage annulled before nightfall. Elara's stomach dropped. She descended the stairs slowly, aware of eyes turning to her, aware of the whispers spreading through the arriving guests. "You have no right to be here," she said. "I have every right to prevent a fraud." Lady Marchmore's smile was triumphant. "You signed this contract, Miss Whitcomb. You agreed to pretend to be engaged for 3 months in exchange for money. That makes this marriage illegal under the Fraudulent Marriage Act of 1823. "The contract was for an engagement, not a marriage," Alistair said, "and it's null and void since both parties agreed to dissolve it 2 weeks ago." "Do you have documentation of that dissolution?" Silence. They didn't. They'd been too focused on the wedding to formalize the legal end of the arrangement. Lady Marchmore's smile widened. "I thought not. Gentlemen, if you would kindly escort Miss Whitcomb, touch her, and I'll have you arrested for assault." Alistair moved between Elara and the men. "She's not going anywhere." "Then we'll present this to the authorities and let them sort it out. Either way, this farce ends today." The entrance hall had filled with guests now, curious, scandalized, eager for drama. Elara saw Vivian in the crowd, looking stricken, saw Lady Pemberton's friends exchanging glances, saw the moment the scandal they'd tried to prevent finally arrived in full force. "You want the truth?" Elara heard herself say. Her voice cut through the whispers. "Fine. Let's give everyone the truth." Alistair turned to look at her. "Elara, don't—" "No, she's right. This has gone on long enough." Elara moved to stand beside him, facing the crowd. "The engagement did start as an arrangement. Lady Pemberton introduced us, saw an opportunity to help my family while solving her own problems, and proposed a 3-month agreement. I was desperate. My family was drowning in debt. So yes, I agreed to pretend to be engaged to a man I'd never met in exchange for financial security." The gasps echoed through the hall. Lady Marchmore's expression was pure vindication. "But here's what that contract didn't account for," Elara continued. "It didn't account for the fact that Alistair and I would actually like each other, that we'd spend hours arguing about philosophy and politics and whether humans are fundamentally selfish or just scared. It didn't account for the fact that somewhere between the practiced touches and the rehearsed conversations, we'd become actual friends. And it definitely didn't account for the fact that I'd fall in love with him." She turned to Alistair. His expression was unreadable, but his hand found hers and held tight. "The contract was for 3 months of pretending," she said. "But what happened between us was real, is real. And if that makes me a fraud, if that makes this marriage illegal, then fine, prosecute me. But you can't annul feelings. You can't invalidate something that started as survival and became genuine." The hall was silent. Even Lady Marchmore seemed temporarily at a loss. Then Alistair spoke, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Elara's telling the truth. The arrangement was my mother's idea. I agreed to it because I was tired of fighting society's expectations, tired of my mother's matchmaking, tired of the constant scrutiny. 3 months of pretending seemed easier than another year of resisting. But then I met Elara, and she was nothing like I expected." He looked at the assembled guests, at the society that had judged and whispered and speculated. "She's smarter than half the men in Parliament. She's brave enough to call me on my worst impulses. She makes me laugh, which almost no one does. And she chose to marry me even after I gave her multiple opportunities to walk away, not because of my title or my money, but because apparently she's terrible at making safe decisions." A few uncertain laughs rippled through the crowd. "So, yes," Alistair continued, "this started as an arrangement, a calculated mercenary agreement between people who needed something from each other. But it became a partnership. It became friendship. And for me, at least, it became love. If that offends your sense of propriety, if that violates some rule about how engagements should begin, then I don't care. I'm marrying her anyway." He turned back to Lady Marchmore. "Now get out of my house before I have you forcibly removed." The 2 men in dark suits looked uncertain. Lady Marchmore's face was mottled with fury, and something else, defeat maybe, or the recognition that she'd lost this battle. "This isn't over," she said. "Yes, it is." Lady Pemberton's voice cut through the tension. She descended the stairs with regal precision, every inch the Duchess. "You came here hoping to destroy them with exposure. Instead, they've beaten you to it. They've told the truth, claimed it, made it their own. What scandal is left? The illegality is non-existent. A private arrangement between families isn't illegal. Helping a future daughter-in-law's family financially isn't fraud. And two people actually getting married after an arranged introduction is exactly how half the marriages in this room started. Lady Pemberton's smile was sharp. The only difference is that most people aren't honest enough to admit it. Murmurs through the crowd, some approving, some shocked, all of them reassessing. Lady Marchmore looked around, seemed to realize she'd been outmaneuvered. Fine. Marry your bought bride, Your Grace. Let's see how long this particular transaction lasts. She swept out, her companions trailing behind. The crowd remained, watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Alistair looked at Elara. Did you mean it? What you said? About falling in love with you? Yes, every word. Even the part about me making you laugh? Especially that part. You're surprisingly funny when you're being awful. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed his entire face. We're doing this then? Actually getting married? In front of all these witnesses who now know we started as a business arrangement? Unless you're having second thoughts. Third and fourth thoughts. I'm up to about 19 thoughts, most of them terrified. She laughed, feeling something ease in her chest. Then we're even. Not quite. You're still braver than me. That's because I have less to lose. That's not true anymore. You have everything to lose now. His hand tightened on hers. We both do. The minister appeared from the drawing room looking flustered. Are we still? Yes, Alistair said. We're still getting married, right now, unless anyone else wants to object. He looked around the hall. No one spoke. Some guests were smiling. Others looked scandalized but reluctantly impressed. Vivienne was crying. Happy tears, Elara hoped. Then let's begin, the minister said. They processed to the drawing room, which had been transformed with flowers and candles and all the trappings of a proper society wedding. The guests filed in, taking seats, still whispering but no longer with quite the same venom. Elara stood at the altar beside Alistair, her hand in his, and tried to focus on the minister's words instead of the watching eyes. The traditional vows felt both surreal and strangely appropriate, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and health. They'd already tested most of those conditions. The ceremony was just making it official. Do you, Alistair Charles Thornvale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. No hesitation, no doubt. And do you, Elara Margaret Whitcomb, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She looked at Alistair. At this man who'd started as a stranger, became an ally, then a friend, then something she didn't have words for. At the partnership they'd built from lies and desperation and unexpected compatibility. I do. The minister pronounced them married. Alistair kissed her, quick, firm, claiming, and the guests applauded. Some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, all of them acknowledging that whatever they'd witnessed, it was done now. Irreversible. The reception was awkward. Half the guests treated them like romantic heroes, praising their honesty and unconventional approach. The other half treated them like criminals who'd somehow escaped prosecution, but they all stayed curious to see what would happen next. Elara found herself cornered by Mrs. Hartwick during the third course. That was quite the revelation, Mrs. Hartwick said. Very brave or very foolish. Probably both. Most good decisions are. She sipped her wine. For what it's worth, I think you'll be good for him. Thornvale's been too controlled, too isolated. He needed someone to shake things up. I'm not sure shaking things up was the goal. No, survival was the goal. But you got something better in the process. She smiled. That's the thing about desperate choices. Sometimes they lead to better outcomes than careful planning ever could. Across the room, Alistair was engaged in what looked like an intense conversation with several parliamentary colleagues. He caught her eye and raised an eyebrow. Rescue me? She excused herself and crossed to him. His arm immediately went around her waist, pulling her close. Gentlemen, she said, I hope you're not boring my husband with work talk on his wedding day. Your husband started it, Lord Pemberton said, but he was smiling. Congratulations, Your Grace. You've made a bold choice. Several bold choices, actually, but this is my favorite one. After the guests left, after the cleanup began, after the estate settled into evening quiet, Elara and Alistair found themselves alone in the library of the country house. She'd changed out of the wedding dress into something simpler. He'd shed his formal coat and cravat. They sat on the sofa, exhausted and married and slightly disbelieving. "We did it," Elara said. "We did. We're actually married. Legally, publicly, irreversibly married." He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed her one. "How do you feel?" "Terrified, relieved, confused, happy, I think. I'm not entirely sure." "That's an honest answer." "We promised each other honesty. Might as well keep that promise now." They drank in comfortable silence. Outside, rain finally started, the storm that had threatened all day finally arriving now that it was too late to ruin anything. "What happens now?" Elara asked. "Now we figure out how to actually be married. Not engaged, not performing, not pretending, actually married." "Do you know how to do that?" "No idea. You?" "None whatsoever." "Then we'll figure it out together." He set down his glass. "We're good at that, figuring things out. We're good at surviving things. That's different." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, survival is just figuring things out under pressure." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "What about the scandal? Marchmore won't stop. She'll keep pushing, keep digging." "Let her dig. We've already told the worst of it. What else can she expose?" "She could make life miserable, ruin your reputation in Parliament, make it impossible for me to be accepted by society." "Society's acceptance is overrated, and my reputation in Parliament is based on my work, not my personal life." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "We'll weather it, together." "You keep saying that, together, because it's true. That's what we are now, partners, equals, together." The words settled around them like a blanket. Together. Not alone anymore. Not fighting separate battles for separate survival. "I'm still scared," Elara admitted. "Good. So am I. But I'm less scared with you than I was without you." She turned to look at him. "When did you get so good with words?" "When I married someone who values honesty over pretty speeches." "That wasn't pretty? That was factual. There's a difference." She kissed him, tasting whiskey and truth, and the strange comfort of having survived the worst of the storm. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "What?" he asked. "I'm married to you, actually married. It's bizarre." "Bizarre good or bizarre bad?" "Bizarre." "Right. It feels right." "That's good enough for me." They stayed in the library until midnight, talking about nothing important, what books they wanted to read, what they'd do at the estate, whether they should get a dog. Normal conversation for normal people in a normal marriage, except there was nothing normal about them, and both of them knew it. 3 days later, back in London, the newspapers were still dissecting the wedding. Some praised their honesty. Others condemned the impropriety. Most were confused about whether to celebrate or scandalize. "Look at this one," Elara said over breakfast, reading aloud. "The Duke and Duchess of Thornvale have proven that love can emerge from the most practical of arrangements. Their candor is refreshing in an age of pretense." "Better than this one," Alastair countered. "The spectacle at Thornvale Estate proves that even titles cannot buy respectability. The new Duchess is a fortune hunter, pure and simple. At least they're consistent. Half love us, half hate us. None of them are indifferent. Is that good? It's honest. I prefer honest hatred to false approval." A letter arrived from Vivian that afternoon. "Dearest Elara, I'm sorry I didn't speak to you after the ceremony. I was overwhelmed by everything that happened. But I wanted you to know. I think you were incredibly brave. What you and the Duke did, standing in front of everyone and telling the truth instead of hiding, that took courage. I don't know if society will forgive you. I don't know if this marriage will work. But I know you made a choice for yourself instead of letting fear or propriety decide for you. And that's worth celebrating. Come visit when you're ready. I want to hear all the things you couldn't say in public." Your proud and slightly terrified cousin, Vivian Elara, showed the letter to Alastair. He read it, then smiled. "At least someone approves. One person is better than none. I approve. That's 2. You're biased. You married me." "Exactly. I have excellent judgment." That night, at a dinner party hosted by Lord Cavendish, one of the few who'd still invited them, the battle lines became clearer. The room divided naturally. Those who supported them clustered close, asking about their plans, treating the scandal like an interesting story instead of a disqualification. Those who disapproved maintained careful distance, observing with pinched expressions and whispered commentary. Lady Marchmore was conspicuously absent, which Elara took as a small victory. But during the port and cigars, one of Alistair's parliamentary opponents cornered him near the fireplace. "Quite the show you put on, Thornvale. Very dramatic." "I prefer honest to dramatic." "Honest?" Lord Fenwick's laugh was ugly. "You admitted to buying a bride and you call that honest?" "I admitted to starting from a practical arrangement and developing real feelings. That's more honesty than most marriages in this room can claim." "Perhaps, but it shows poor judgment, desperation, and that makes me question your judgment on other matters, like the reform bill you're pushing in Parliament." Alistair's expression went cold. "My personal life has nothing to do with my political positions. Doesn't it? A man who can't manage his own household, who makes impulsive decisions based on emotion, that's not a man I want shaping policy." "I didn't ask for your support." "No, but you'll need it, and you've just made it considerably harder to get." Fenwick smiled. "Enjoy your scandalous marriage, Thornvale. I hope it was worth the political capital you just burned." He walked away, leaving Alistair staring into the fire. Elara appeared at his elbow. "What did he say?" "That the scandal will hurt my political standing, that I've lost credibility by admitting to an arranged marriage." "Is he right?" "Probably. Some of the moderates won't touch me now. They'll see me as reckless, impulsive." "Are you regretting this?" He turned to look at her. "Not for a second. Fenwick's support was never guaranteed anyway, and I'd rather have you and lose political allies than the reverse." "That's not very pragmatic of you." "No, it's not. You're ruining my reputation for cold calculation." "Good. You were too calculated anyway." 2 weeks after the wedding, the first test came. Alistair's reform bill, the one he'd been championing for months, came up for vote. Usually, he had the numbers, but Fenwick had been working behind the scenes, using the scandal to peel away support. The night before the vote, Alistair paced the library at Thornvale House. "I'm going to lose. Fenwick's turned half my moderate support against me." "Then fight harder. Remind them why the bill matters." "It won't be enough. They're voting against me, not against the policy. So change the narrative. Make it about the policy again instead of about you." "How?" Elara thought for a moment. "What if I helped?" "You? How?" "I'm the scandal they're all talking about. What if I gave them a reason to talk about something else instead?" She outlined her plan. Alistair listened, his expression shifting from skeptical to impressed. "That's risky. If it backfires, then we're no worse off than we are now. But if it works, we might actually win this." The next morning, Elara appeared at Parliament. Not in the gallery where wives traditionally sat, but in the lobby where she could speak directly to the members arriving for the vote. She'd prepared carefully. Facts, figures, personal stories about the people affected by the reform bill. She spoke to every moderate who would listen, not as the scandalous duchess, but as someone who understood poverty and desperation and the practical need for change. "You think my marriage disqualifies my husband's judgment," she said to one hesitant lord, "but my marriage is exactly why he understands this bill. He saw someone in desperate circumstances and chose to help instead of judging. That's what this policy does, helps instead of judges." To another, "I know what it's like to count pennies and wonder which bill to pay. Your constituents know it too. This bill gives them breathing room. Vote against my husband if you must, but don't vote against them." By the time the vote was called, she'd spoken to 24 members. Some were moved, others remained skeptical, but she'd given them a reason to think about the policy instead of the scandal. The vote was close, closer than it should have been, but Alistair's bill passed, by 3 votes. That evening, in the library, he pulled her into his arms. "You did that. You saved it. We did that, together. I thought politicians' wives were supposed to stay quiet and look decorative. I'm terrible at following expectations. You should know that by now." He kissed her, deep and claiming. "Best decision I ever made, marrying you. Even though it's cost you political capital? Especially because of that. Turns out I care more about you than about capital." "That's not very ducal of you." "No, it's not. You're ruining me for proper ducal behavior." Good. You were too proper anyway. Word spread quickly about Elara's role in the vote. Some condemned it as improper for a woman to involve herself in politics. Others praised it as practical and effective. But the narrative started shifting. Instead of the Duke who bought a bride, they became the Duke and Duchess who fight for reform together. It wasn't complete redemption. Lady Marchmore still whispered poison. Some doors remained closed. Some invitations never came. But other doors opened. Reformers sought them out. People who valued results over propriety started paying attention. The scandal became less about impropriety and more about unconventional partnership. 6 weeks after the wedding, Lady Pemberton hosted a dinner at her townhouse. Small, intimate, carefully curated guests. During dessert, she stood and raised her glass. I'd like to make a toast to my son and his new wife. They've shown us all that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit our vulnerabilities, our mistakes, our desperate choices, and then choose to build something real from that honesty. Alistair and Elara started from an arrangement I orchestrated, but what they've built is entirely their own, and I, for one, am proud of them both. The guests applauded. Not everyone. Some faces remained skeptical. But enough. Enough to matter. Afterward, Elara found Lady Pemberton in the drawing room. Thank you for the toast. I meant every word. You've exceeded every expectation I had. Even the ones where I was just supposed to be temporary. Especially those, Lady Pemberton smiled. I arranged an engagement. You two created a marriage. There's a significant difference. Are you admitting you were wrong about something? I'm admitting I underestimated you both, which is perhaps the same thing. That night in their bedroom at Thornvale House, Elara and Alistair lay in bed talking about the dinner, the toast, the slow shift in how society was starting to see them. We're winning, Alistair said. Slowly, but we're winning. Does it feel like winning? It feels like surviving, which is close enough. Elara traced patterns on his chest. What happens when we stop just surviving, when we actually start living? I don't know. I've never gotten that far before. Neither have I. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. Want to figure it out together? He pulled her down for a kiss. Always. Outside, London settled into night. Somewhere, people were still whispering about the scandalous Duke and his bought bride. Somewhere, Lady Marchmore was plotting her next move. Somewhere, society was still deciding whether to accept or reject them. But in this room, in this moment, none of that mattered. They'd survived the worst of it, the lies, the exposure, the scandal, the doubt. They'd chosen each other again and again through every crisis and complication, and they were still choosing each other. That felt like victory enough. That felt like victory enough. But victory, Elara was learning, wasn't a destination. It was a series of battles fought daily, weekly, monthly, each one slightly different, each one requiring new strategy. The real fight began 3 months after the wedding, when Lady Marchmore made her final move. It started with an anonymous pamphlet circulating through London's drawing rooms. Cheaply printed, viciously written, it detailed every aspect of their arrangement, the contract terms, the financial amounts, even quotes from private correspondence that should have been locked away safely. Someone had been stealing documents. Someone close. Alistair discovered it when Lord Cavendish brought him a copy at White's, his expression grim. You need to see this. It's everywhere. Every club, every salon, every household in Mayfair. The pamphlet was titled The Mercenary Duchess, a true account of deception in high society. Elara read it in the library, her hands shaking with rage. They're calling me a prostitute, she said flatly, a woman who sold herself for financial gain. It's slander. We'll sue. For what? Everything in here is technically true. The contract existed. I did receive compensation. They've just framed it in the ugliest possible way. Alistair paced, the controlled facade cracking. Someone gave them access. Someone in this house or my mother's household. Someone we trusted. They discovered the source 2 days later. A footman at Lady Pemberton's house paid handsomely by Marchmore to photograph documents when he cleaned the study. He'd been dismissed immediately, but the damage was done. The pamphlet spread like fire. Within a week, it had reached every corner of society. The careful progress they'd made unraveled. Invitations dried up. Former allies went silent. Even some of the reformers who'd supported Alistair began distancing themselves. "We're toxic," Elara said, staring at the stack of declined invitations on Alistair's desk. "Nobody wants to be associated with us." "Then we don't need their association." "Yes, we do. You need political support for your reforms. I need social credibility to run the charitable foundations. We can't operate in complete isolation." "Watch me." But isolation, they quickly learned, had consequences. Alistair's next reform bill, one addressing child labor in factories, failed to even reach a vote. The committee killed it before it could get to the floor, citing concerns about the sponsor's judgment and character. Elara's attempts to organize a charity event for impoverished women were met with polite refusals from every venue she approached. No one wanted their establishment associated with the scandalous Duchess. Even small things became battles. Shopkeepers were cooler. Servants gossiped more openly. The weight of society's disapproval pressed down from every direction. 4 months after their wedding, sitting in the library that had become their refuge, Elara felt the first cracks of real despair. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I am what they're calling me." "Stop." Alistair's voice was sharp. "You're not what they call you. You're what you choose to be." "And what am I choosing? To ruin your career, to make your life harder." "You're choosing to stand beside me instead of running when things got difficult. That's worth more than their approval." "Is it?" "Because from here, it feels like we're losing everything." "We're not losing everything. We still have each other." "That's not enough to change policy or help people or make any real difference." He pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean into him, this man who'd become her anchor in a storm that showed no signs of ending. "Then we find another way," he said quietly. "We always have." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Vivian appeared at Thornvale House one afternoon, agitated and determined. "I have an idea. It's possibly insane, but so was marrying Alistair, and that worked out." "Debatable," Elara said, but she listened. "The pamphlet made you look mercenary. But what if you used that? What if instead of running from the accusation, you owned it and turned it into something powerful?" "I'm not following." "You married for money. Fine. Lots of women marry for money. They're just not honest about it. What if you started an organization for women in desperate financial situations? Women who need practical help, not charity that comes with judgment. You could call it something direct. The Practical Women's Fund, the Survival Society. Something that acknowledges reality instead of pretending poverty is a moral failing." Elara stared at her cousin. "That's insane." "Brilliant." They spent the next week developing the concept, not a traditional charity that demanded gratitude and proper behavior, a fund that offered direct financial assistance to women in crisis, widows with debts, daughters with failing family estates, women trapped between poverty and propriety. "We'll be honest about it," Elara told Alistair as they refined the plan. "No pretending it's about moral improvement. It's about survival. About giving women the same choice you gave me, a way out of desperate circumstances. Society will hate it. Society already hates us. Might as well do something useful while we're being hated." They launched the Women's Practical Relief Fund in January, 6 months after their wedding. The announcement was deliberately provocative, written by Elara herself. Too many women are told their financial desperation is a moral failing, that needing help means weakness, that accepting assistance requires shame. The Women's Practical Relief Fund rejects these notions. We offer direct financial support to women in crisis, no questions asked, no judgment rendered. Because survival is not shameful, it's human. The backlash was immediate and fierce. "The Duchess of Thornvale is encouraging women to abandon pride and propriety," one newspaper thundered. "She's promoting dependence and moral laxity." "Finally," another wrote, "someone willing to acknowledge that not all women can simply try harder out of poverty. The fund is pragmatic, honest, and desperately needed." Opinion divided sharply. Traditionalists condemned it, reformers celebrated it, but everyone was talking about it, and women started applying for help. Letters arrived by the hundreds. Widows drowning in their husbands' debts, daughters watching their families collapse, women trapped in situations where one financial crisis meant complete ruin. Stories that mirrored Elara's own so closely it hurt to read them. The fund's first distribution went to 37 women. Direct payments, no strings attached, enough to settle debts or buy time or escape circumstances that were slowly destroying them. Within 2 months, they'd helped over 100 women. Within 4 months, other wealthy women started contributing. Quietly at first, anonymous donations, money sent through intermediaries, but gradually, more openly, women who'd experienced financial terror themselves, who understood the difference between charity and survival. Lady Pemberton was among the first public donors. I raised money for orphanages and hospitals for 30 years, she told Elara over tea. All very proper, very acceptable. But this actually helps women like you were. Women's society pretends don't exist. You're not worried about the scandal? I orchestrated the original scandal. I might as well support the productive outcome. By summer, the fund had distributed over £10,000 to 200 women. The numbers grew weekly, and with them, something unexpected happened. The narrative shifted. Women who'd been helped started speaking publicly, writing letters to newspapers, telling their stories. Not with shame, but with practical honesty about financial desperation and the relief of receiving help without judgment. The Duchess saved my family, one widow wrote to the Times, not with pity or condescension, but with recognition that sometimes circumstances defeat even the strongest person. She understood because she lived it. I was 3 weeks from debtor's prison when the fund approved my application, another wrote. Now my daughter can stay in school and I can keep our house. The Duchess didn't ask if I deserved help. She just gave it. The stories accumulated, each one a small rebellion against the idea that financial desperation was moral failure. Each one shifting how people saw Elara, not as a woman who'd sold herself, but as someone who'd survived and was now helping others do the same. The change in society's perception was gradual but undeniable. Invitations started arriving again. Not from everyone, Lady Marchmore's circle remained implacably hostile, but from enough people to matter. More importantly, Alistair's political capital began recovering. The reformers who'd distanced themselves returned, seeing the fund as proof of commitment to practical change rather than just political posturing. His next bill, expanding education access for working-class children, passed with a comfortable margin. They're starting to see us differently, Alistair said one evening, reviewing correspondence from parliamentary allies. Not as scandalous, but as serious. About time. We've been serious from the beginning. Yes, but now they believe it. The confrontation with Lady Marchmore came in September at the Duchess of Ashford's autumn ball. Elara hadn't wanted to attend. The event would be full of people who'd condemned her, whispered about her, believed every word of that vicious pamphlet. But Alistair had convinced her. We don't hide anymore. We walk in there like we belong. But if they don't think we belong, then they're wrong. And we prove it. They arrived fashionably late. Elara wore deep sapphire silk that Madame Laurent had declared armor disguised as elegance. Alistair was devastating in black evening wear, his hand possessive at her waist. The ballroom went quiet when they entered. Every eye turned. Every conversation paused. Then the Duchess of Ashford swept forward, smiling. Your Graces, how wonderful you could attend. I was just telling Lady Pemberton about the education bill. Such important work. She kissed Elara's cheek, a public endorsement, a declaration of support. Other guests followed her lead, moving forward to greet them, to ask about the fund, to praise the bill's passage. Not everyone. Some remained distant, disapproving, but enough welcomed them that it felt like vindication. Lady Marchmore watched from across the room, her expression venomous. During the supper break, she cornered Elara near the refreshment table. Enjoying your triumph? Her smile was acid. You've managed to convince them you're something other than a fortune hunter. I've convinced them I'm useful. There's a difference. Useful? You're a woman who sold herself and is now encouraging others to do the same through your little fund. The fund helps women survive desperate circumstances. If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine why. It doesn't threaten me. It disgusts me. You've taken your own moral failing and turned it into a cause. Elara set down her champagne glass very carefully. You spent months trying to destroy me. You stole private documents, published vicious lies, did everything possible to ruin my reputation and my husband's career. Why? Because people like you don't belong in our world. You're common, desperate, bought and paid for. You're right. I was desperate. I did accept help in exchange for performing a role, and instead of being ashamed of that, I chose to acknowledge it and use that experience to help other women facing the same desperation. Elara stepped closer. You tried to destroy me with exposure, but exposure only works when people are hiding. I'm not hiding anymore. So what power do you have left? Lady Marchmore's face went white with fury. You'll always be tainted by what you did. Perhaps. But I'll also always be the woman who survived, who helped others survive, who built something real from desperate circumstances. What will you be remembered for? Cruelty? Viciousness? Tearing down women who dared to be honest about their struggles? You are finished with this conversation. Elara turned away. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Lady Marchmore. I know I will. She walked back to Alistair, her heart pounding but her head high. His eyes were bright with pride. What did you say to her? The truth. All of it. How did she react? Like someone who just realized they lost. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, dances, small victories. People approached them who'd been silent for months. Reform-minded lords wanted to discuss policy. Wealthy women asked about contributing to the fund. Even some of the traditionalists grudgingly acknowledged their work. It wasn't complete acceptance. Some doors remained closed. Some people still whispered. Lady Marchmore's circle maintained their hostility, but the tide had turned, undeniably, permanently. That night, in their bedroom at Thornvale House, Elara and Alistair stood at the window watching London settle into sleep. A year ago, I was counting chandeliers and calculating which debts to pay first, Elara said quietly. Now I'm a duchess running a relief fund and married to a man I'm fairly certain I love. Fairly certain? Completely certain. I just like keeping you uncertain. He pulled her close, his arms around her waist. A year ago, I was avoiding society and fighting my mother's matchmaking schemes. Now I'm married to a woman who argues with me about philosophy and makes me want to be better than I am. Want to be or are better? Both, I think. You make me both. They stood there for a long moment, watching the city, feeling the weight of how far they'd come from that desperate arrangement in the Ashford ballroom. Do you think we would have found each other anyway? Elara asked, if circumstances had been different? No. We needed the desperation to push us together. We needed the arrangement to force us to actually see each other. So we're grateful for the lies that brought us together? Grateful for everything that led us here, even the terrible parts. She turned in his arms to face him. What happens now? We've survived the scandal, launched the fund, started winning back political support. What's next? Whatever we want. That's the beautiful part. We're not performing anymore. We're just living. Just living sounds complicated. It probably is. But we're good at complicated. Are we? Or are we just good at surviving complicated? Does it matter? Surviving is living, just more intensely. She kissed him, tasting truth and partnership and the strange miracle of having turned a calculated lie into something worth building a life around. The fund continued growing. By the end of the year, they'd helped over 400 women. Other wealthy families started establishing similar programs. The model spread. Practical help without judgment. Survival without shame. Alistair's education bill passed in March. His factory safety legislation followed in July. Each success built on the last, his political influence recovering and then exceeding where it had been before the scandal. They're calling you a reformer now, Elara said, reading the newspaper coverage of his latest bill. Not a duke who dabbles in politics, but an actual reformer. That's because of you. The fund gave me credibility I never had just talking about helping people. Now I've actually done it. We've done it? Yes, we. 2 years after their wedding, Lady Pemberton hosted a dinner celebrating the fund's second anniversary. The guest list read like a who's who of reform-minded aristocracy, lords and ladies who'd moved beyond scandal to focus on results. Lady Marchmore wasn't invited. Neither were many of the traditionalists who'd condemned them. But enough people came to fill the ballroom, to raise glasses and toast, to celebrate what had been built from desperation and lies. During the speeches, a woman stood, Mrs. Helena Ashworth, one of the fund's first recipients. 2 years ago, I was a widow with 3 children and debts I couldn't pay. I'd written to every charity in London, been told to pray harder, work harder, be more virtuous. Then I heard about the Duchess's fund. I applied expecting more judgment, more condescension. Instead, I received a check and a letter that said, "Survival isn't shameful. Use this time to rebuild." Her voice wavered. That money saved my family. But more than that, the Duchess's honesty saved my dignity. She didn't pretend she was better than me. She acknowledged we'd both been desperate, both survived through help we needed, but society said we shouldn't ask for. That honesty changed how I saw myself. Not as a failure, but as a survivor. The applause was thunderous. Elara felt tears prick her eyes. Alistair's hand found hers under the table and held tight. After the dinner, as guests departed and the staff cleaned up, Elara and Alistair found themselves alone in the garden behind Lady Pemberton's townhouse. "Do you remember that night?" Elara asked. "At the Ashford ball, when your mother cornered me?" "I remember you looked like you were calculating the chandelier's value." "I was. I calculated everything back then. Every penny, every choice, every survival strategy." "Do you still?" "Sometimes. The habit's hard to break, but now I calculate different things. How many women we can help. What reforms have the best chance of passing? How to use privilege for something beyond maintaining privilege. That's a better use of calculation. You're a better use of everything." She looked at him. "I know I'm supposed to be eloquent about this, find pretty words for what we've built. But honestly, all I can think is that 2 years ago I was drowning, and now I'm not. And you're the reason why." "We're the reason why. Both of us. Fine, we're the reason why. Partnership, equality, all that modern nonsense we're supposed to believe in." He laughed, pulling her close. "Modern nonsense that actually works. Shocking, really. Who would have thought honesty and partnership would be more effective than lies and control? Almost like someone should write a pamphlet about it. Don't even joke. One pamphlet about us was enough." They stood in the garden, wrapped in each other, watching the moon rise over London. Somewhere in the city, women were reading about the fund and gathering courage to apply. Somewhere, Alistair's reforms were changing lives in practical, measurable ways. Somewhere, the scandal that had nearly destroyed them was becoming the foundation of something that actually mattered. 5 years after that desperate night at the Ashford ball, Elara stood in the main hall of Thornvale House, watching workers hang a portrait. Her portrait. Duchess of Thornvale, founder of the Women's Practical Relief Fund, wife to one of Parliament's leading reformers. The artist had captured her exactly as she was, not softened or idealized, but honest. A woman who'd survived desperation and chose to acknowledge it rather than hide it. "What do you think?" the artist asked nervously. "It's honest. I like it." Alistair appeared from his study, followed by their daughter, 3 years old, dark-haired, already showing signs of inheriting both her father's seriousness and her mother's pragmatism. "Mama!" Catherine ran over, nearly tripping over her dress. "Is that you?" "It is. You look important." "Do I?" "Very important. Like someone who does important things." Elara caught Alistair's eye over their daughter's head. He was smiling, the real smile, the one that transformed his entire face. "Your mother is important," he told Catherine. "She helps people. That's the most important thing anyone can do." "And what do you do, Papa?" "I help her help people. It's a good partnership." That night, after Catherine was asleep and the portrait hung properly in its place, Elara and Alistair returned to the library that had become their sanctuary. "Look at us," Elara said, gesturing to the portrait visible through the open door. "Respectable, influential, almost boring." "Boring? You started a relief fund that half of society still thinks is scandalous." "Started being the key word. Now it's established, accepted. Other people run it day to day. I'm practically conventional." "You're many things. Conventional isn't one of them." She settled into the sofa beside him, her head on his shoulder in the casual intimacy they'd developed over years of partnership. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The arrangement, the scandal, everything we went through?" "Never. Do you?" "Not the outcomes, sometimes the process. I wish I'd been braver sooner." "You were brave from the beginning. You just didn't recognize it." "I was desperate from the beginning. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm sitting, bravery and desperation look remarkably similar." They sat in comfortable silence. the kind that only came from years of knowing each other completely. Outside, London continued its eternal noise. Inside Thornvale House, the portrait of the Duchess hung beside portraits of previous Thornvales, all of them severe and proper and utterly conventional. Elara's portrait was different, honest, unflinching. A reminder that sometimes the best legacies came from the worst circumstances, and that survival was worth celebrating rather than hiding. "What do you think they'll say about us?" Elara asked. "In 50 years, when people look at that portrait and read about the fund and the reforms?" "Probably that we were unconventional, possibly scandalous, definitely effective." "That's good enough for me. Good enough for me, too." Catherine appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Can't sleep." "Bad dreams?" Alistair asked. "No, just thinking." "About what?" "About being important when I grow up, like Mama." Elara opened her arms and Catherine climbed into her lap, warm and solid and real. "You want to know the secret to being important?" Elara asked. "What?" "Find people who need help and actually help them. Don't worry about what society thinks, or whether it's proper, or if people will judge you. Just see a problem and fix it." "That's it?" "That's it. Simple, but hard." "Like you and Papa?" "Exactly like me and Papa." Catherine thought about this, then nodded seriously. "I can do that. I know you can." Alistair watched them, his wife and daughter, and felt something settle in his chest that he'd spent 31 years not knowing he was missing. Not control, not calculation, just belonging. The knowledge that he'd built something real with someone who challenged him, changed him, made him better than he'd been alone. "What are you thinking about?" Elara asked, catching his expression. "How lucky we got. How easily this could have gone wrong." "It did go wrong multiple times. We just kept fixing it." "That's a generous interpretation of panic and desperation." "Panic and desperation that led to partnership and reform. I'm counting it as success." He laughed, pulling both of them close. "Fair enough. We'll call it successful panic." Years later, historians would debate the Thornvale marriage. Some called it scandalous, proof of declining moral standards. Others called it progressive, a model of honest partnership. The Women's Practical Relief Fund expanded into the Women's Practical Relief Society, operating across England and eventually into Scotland and Wales. It helped thousands of women survive desperate circumstances and inspired dozens of similar organizations worldwide. Alistair's reforms, education, labor, social welfare, became the foundation of broader policy changes that outlasted his parliamentary career. But in Thornvale House, in the library where it all began, the truth was simpler. Two people had been desperate. They'd made a calculated choice to help each other survive. And somewhere in the performance, in the practiced touches and rehearsed conversations, they'd found something neither had been looking for. Not love at first sight, not fairy tale romance. Just two people recognizing each other, choosing each other, building something real from the rubble of circumstances neither could control. It wasn't perfect. They still argued about politics, philosophy, how to raise Catherine, whether to get a dog. The scandal never fully disappeared. Some doors remained closed. Some people never forgave the impropriety. But they'd survived together, built together, changed things together. And that, Elara thought, as she watched Alistair carry their sleeping daughter up to bed, was worth more than any chandelier she'd ever counted. The lie had become truth. The arrangement had become partnership. The survival strategy had become a legacy. And the girl who'd stood on the margins of society, calculating her worth in borrowed dresses and unpaid debts, had become the woman who helped rewrite the rules about what desperate choices could create. She'd become the Duchess of Thornvale, not through title or marriage alone, but through courage, honesty, and the relentless determination to turn desperation into power. And she'd done it by refusing to be ashamed of the lie that started it all.